Chapter 315. In the wasteland, countless drops of blood seeped into the earth every day. Whether it was the Realm Defense Alliance or the Pale Sword Sect, they were all waiting for the Qingzhou Origin Heart to appear. Once it appeared, the war would begin. However, the Origin Heart didn't move at all. 2 days later, the faces of Supremacy Lu and the others sank. They had already noticed that something was wrong. High in the clouds, Supremacy Lu said, "Something's wrong." Xiao's face was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. Supremacy Lu suddenly said, "Could it have been obtained by the Pale Sword Sect?" Xiao shook his head. "That's impossible. The Pale Sword Sect couldn't have obtained the Qingzhou Origin Heart without anyone knowing. You should know that without the support of the Grand Array, if the Origin Heart resists, it will cause the world's spiritual energy to fluctuate. Unless it willingly follows the Pale Sword Sect. However, that's impossible." Willingly follow? Supremacy Lu shook his head. He also felt that it was impossible. The Origin Heart was extremely wary of humans, so it was impossible for it to willingly follow them. After a moment of silence, Supremacy Lu said, "Let's go to the Divine Divination Sect and ask that old faker to help us." "Forget it, I'll go myself." With that, he turned and left. Not long after, Supremacy Lu returned to the Central Divine Prefecture. He arrived at the top of a barren mountain. There was only a dilapidated palace on the mountain. Above the palace's entrance was a plaque with 3 words that were almost unrecognizable: Divine Divination Sect. Lu Xun walked into the hall. Inside the hall there was an old man lying on the ground. This old man wore a loose gray robe, and his entire body exuded a strong smell of alcohol. Supremacy Lu walked in front of the old man and placed a wine bottle beside him. The old man immediately sat up and grabbed the bottle, drinking it in one gulp. A moment later he lay back down in satisfaction. Supremacy Lu said, "I have a request." The old man waved his hand. "Old man Lu, if it's about divination then don't mention it." Supremacy Lu said, "You must help me with this." The old man sat up and stared coldly at Lord Lu. "You should know why our divine fortune-telling sect ended up like this. It's because we divined the secrets of heaven and were punished by heaven." Supremacy Lu nodded slightly. "I naturally understand, but this time it's very important to our Realm Defense Alliance. This is the last time. After this time I will not come here again. Is that okay?" The old man fell silent for a moment before he said, "What is it?" High Lord Lu said in a deep voice, "The Green Province's Origin Heart." The old man shook his head. "You don't have to waste your efforts. The Origin Heart has already fallen into someone else's hands." Hearing this, Lord Lu's pupils shrank. "What do you mean?" The old man said indifferently, "What do you mean? The Heart of Origin is no longer in the Green Province. It has fallen into the hands of someone else." Supremacy Lu glared at the old man. "How did you know?" The old man fell silent for a moment before he said, "Old man Lu, even though I don't know what your Realm Defense Alliance wants the Origin Heart for, but I'll say one more thing. The Origin Heart of Azure Continent can't be compared to the Origin Heart of Darkwave Continent. It is blessed by the heavens, so it's best if you don't have any designs on it." High Lord Lu's expression returned to calm. "Who has it?" The old man laughed bitterly. "Do you really think I'm so divine? If I was, then the divine fortune-telling sect wouldn't have fallen to such a state. All I know is that the Origin Heart isn't in the Green Province's Origin Heart. As for who has it, I really don't know." High Lord Lu spoke in a low voice. "Is there any way to find out?" The old man shook his head. "That person was able to sneak away with the Origin Heart under the noses of both your Realm Defense Alliance and the Pale Sword Sect. He is absolutely not an ordinary person." As he spoke, he lay down. "Old man Lu, I've told you everything I know. Let's go." Within the hall, High Lord Lu remained silent for a moment before he said, "It isn't in the hands of the Pale Sword Sect." The old man shook his head. "I don't know. I really don't know who has it. Old man Lu, you should be aware that our Tao of divination is only able to calculate a rough direction. As for the details, not to mention me, even the founding ancestor wouldn't be able to accomplish that." High Lord Lu glanced at the old man and then he turned around and left. After High Lord Lu left, the old man sighed softly. "Your Realm Defense Alliance is probably going to suffer." After High Lord Lu left the Central Divine Prefecture, he directly returned to Pine Prefecture. High above the clouds, High Lord Lu looked down at the desolate mountain range. At this moment, the grand formation around the mountain range had been withdrawn. Emoshio spoke in a low voice. Are you sure that the origin heart has been taken? High Lord Lu spoke softly. It should be true. The Pale Sword Sect? Asked Emoshio. High Lord Lu fell silent for a moment and then he shook his head. It's impossible for them to seize the origin heart without making a sound. Moreover, if they obtained it, they would definitely destroy it. It's utterly impossible for them to dispatch all their experts to Pine Prefecture. Emoshio's brows knit together tightly. If it isn't the Pale Sword Sect, then who could it be? When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression suddenly changed. High Lord Lu gazed at Emoshio when he noticed the change in Emoshio's expression. What? Emoshio spoke in a low voice. I thought of something. High Lord Lu said, Speak. Emoshio's expression was slightly gloomy. Not long ago I sensed the aura of the origin heart here and I brought it here. However, when we arrived here we didn't see the origin heart and we only saw a person. Person? High Lord Lu frowned slightly. Who? Emoshio said, Yi Xian. Yi Xian. High Lord Lu's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when he heard this. Emoshio spoke in a low voice. We really did sense the aura of the origin heart that day, but we only saw Yi Xian when we arrived here. At that time I thought that it was utterly impossible for Yi Xian to obtain the origin heart without making a sound. So, I felt that I might have sensed wrongly. But now it seems like... When he spoke up to hear, he shook his head. That can't be right. Yi Xian is merely the Sword Emperor. It's utterly impossible for him to have taken away the origin heart. Not necessarily. High Lord Lu suddenly spoke coldly. This person has always been mysterious. If it was anyone else, then I would definitely not believe it. Even if it was the Pale Sword Sect, I wouldn't believe it. But I believe this person. Emoshio looked at High Lord Lu. High Lord, you think that it's very likely that the Azure Prefecture's origin heart is in Yi Xian's possession? High Lord Lu nodded. If you're not wrong, then it's very likely to be in his possession. Then where is Yi Xian now? Emoshio turned around to look at an old man and the old man spoke in a low voice. He's with the Pale Sword Sect now. High Lord Lu spoke indifferently. Gather everyone and follow me. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left, and over 30 True Defense Realm experts followed behind him. In next to no time, High Lord Lu led the members of the Realm Defense Alliance to a hill on the other side. At the top of the hill, Qin Beihan walked in front of High Lord Lu and smiled. High Lord Lu, why aren't you waiting for the birth of the origin heart? Why are you here? High Lord Lu glanced at Qin Beihan. Where's Yi Xian? Yi Xian? Qin Beihan smiled. Why is High Lord Lu looking for him? High Lord Lu replied indifferently. Just a question. Qin Beihan was about to speak when High Lord Lu suddenly interjected. Qin Beihan, I don't want to talk nonsense with you right now. I just want to see Yi Xian. Qin Beihan's smile gradually turned cold. At this time a voice came from the side. High Lord Lu is looking for me? High Lord Lu turned around and saw a man walking over from not far away. It was Yi Xian. Beside Yi Xian was a woman Yuqi. High Lord Lu's gaze fell on Yi Xian. Is the Azure Prefecture's origin heart with you? Azure Prefecture's origin heart? Hearing High Lord Lu's words, Qin Beihan and the others were slightly stunned. Even Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Origin heart? What origin heart? High Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, don't play dumb in front of the old man. Is the origin heart with you or not? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. High Lord Lu, are you crazy? How can the origin heart be with me? Look at me, do I look like someone with the origin heart? High Lord Lu was about to speak when Qin Beihan suddenly said, High Lord Lu, are you joking? High Lord Lu looked at Qin Beihan, his face extremely cold. Do you think I look like I'm joking? Qin Beihan smiled. Then do you think a mere Dharma-controlling realm like him can obtain the origin heart? If the origin heart is so easy to obtain, would your Realm Defense Alliance go through so much effort? High Lord Lu looked at Yi Xian. He should know whether he obtained it or not. Yi Xian said seriously, High Lord Lu, the origin heart is with me. Hearing this, everyone was stunned. At this moment Yi Xian grinned. Lord Lu, I'm sure you want to hear this. So, I just said it to make you happy. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yuqi shook his head and smiled. Sly. Qin Beihan and the others also couldn't help laughing. At this time High Lord Lu suddenly walked not far from Yi Xian. He stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, the origin heart is with you, right? Yi Xian said with a smile. It is with me. High Lord Lu narrowed his eyes. You admit it? Yi Xian smiled. You definitely wouldn't believe me if I said it isn't, so I can only say it is. High Lord Lu stared at Yi Xian for a long time, and then he looked at Qin Beihan. My Realm Defense Alliance is taking this person away. Taking him away. Just this one sentence caused the atmosphere to instantly become tense. Qin Beihan shook his head and smiled. High Lord Lu, you really know how to joke today. High Lord Lu looked Qin Beihan in the eye. I'm not joking with you. My Realm Defense Alliance must take this person away today and no one can stop us. Qin Beihan smiled. Then I can only say that you're overthinking it, High Lord Lu. Yi Xian is a disciple of my Pale Sword sect. So long as we old fellows are here today, you can forget about taking him away. High Lord Lu nodded slightly. Since that's the case, then let's fight. Qin Beihan smiled. Any time. At the side, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. High Lord Lu, you haven't asked for my opinion before you want to take me away. High Lord Lu pointed at Yi Xian angrily. Cut the crap, I've been unhappy with you for a long time. Today, even if the person behind you appears, this old man will kill you. As soon as he finished speaking, he directly charged at Yi Xian. Chapter 316. Yi Xian sneered at the sight of Lord Lu's attack. Just as he was about to make his move, Qin Beihan suddenly stood in front of him. Qin Beihan looked at Lu Xun with a cold smile. Lu Xun, aren't you ashamed to bully a junior? Let me play with you. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and pointed a finger at them. Swoosh. A flying sword flew out from his sleeve. It was so fast that Yi Xian couldn't catch the flying sword's trajectory. Sword immortal. Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. Only a flying sword like this could be considered a real flying sword. Opposite Qin Beihan, Lu Xun waved his hand and a wave shield suddenly appeared in front of him. Boom. Heaven and earth suddenly trembled. Qin Beihan's flying sword was blocked. Qin Beihan glanced at the shield in front of Lu Xun and smiled. Come to think of it, this should be Lu Xun's Yuanin shield. Lu Xun glanced at Qin Beihan indifferently. Now if your Pale Sword sect hands over Yi Xian, we can temporarily stop fighting. If your Pale Sword sect really wants to protect him, then you can accompany him in death. Qin Beihan smiled. Do you think I'm scared? Lu Xun narrowed his eyes. If that's the case, then accompany him in death. Dozens of people suddenly appeared in the surroundings. All of them were true Imperial Dharma realm. Behind Qin Beihan, 17 people also appeared. Among them, Yi Xian saw some familiar faces such as Zhang Tai, Gu Shishu, Yu Qi, Zhou Xian, and some he didn't know. However, these people were all true Imperial Dharma realm experts. Yi Xian's face sank because he didn't see Great Uncle Jian Xian. In the air, Lu Xun looked down at Qin Beihan. Come, let me see how much a great sword immortal has improved after so many years. Qin Beihan smiled. As you wish. He turned into a sword light and soared into the sky. Below, Yu Qi turned his head and glanced at Yi Xian not far away. Stand down. Yi Xian hesitated and was about to speak when Yu Qi said, Stand down. This time his voice was a little stern. Yi Xian grinned. All right. With that he turned around and left. In the sky, several experts of the Realm Protection Alliance directly chased after Yi Xian, but very quickly Yu Qi and the others rose from the ground and directly blocked in front of them. The battle began. High above the clouds, Lord Lu and Qin Beihan looked at each other from afar, both expressionless. Supremacy Lu suddenly extended his right hand. In an instant the clouds beneath him began to gather towards his palm. Not long after, a huge cloud vortex appeared beneath him. In the distance, Qin Beihan's right thumb, ring finger and pinky suddenly bent. In the next moment, a sword howl resounded from within his sleeve. Supremacy Lu said coldly, Come, let me see the sword in your sleeve. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly spread out his right hand. In the next moment, the huge cloud vortex suddenly shrank into a palm-sized vortex in the center of his palm. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly slapped his palm toward Qin Beihan, who was opposite him. As soon as his palm hit, the space within a radius of 1,000 zhongs suddenly became illusory. At the same time, a huge cloud palm print shuttled through the sky. It was faster than lightning. Not only that, but wherever this cloud palm print passed, the space directly twisted into a twisted shape. Opposite Supremacy Lu, Qin Beihan suddenly pointed forward with a finger. From his sleeve a sword suddenly flew out and a sword light appeared. Buzz. A sword howl suddenly resounded through the sky. At the same time the sword light soared into the sky, and in an instant this sword light directly covered the entire sky. Boom. A shocking explosion suddenly resounded in the sky, and the space within a few thousand zhang trembled as if it was about to collapse. It was extremely terrifying. A true expert. Somewhere below, Xian's blood was boiling as he watched. At this moment he finally realized that Supremacy Lu was actually so strong, and with his current strength, it was impossible for him to go against Supremacy Lu. Moreover, it was the first time he'd seen such a battle. This kind of expert could really destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Although he'd seen the mysterious woman fight before, every time she attacked, it wasn't earth-shattering, and it was always a matter of a single move. Above the clouds, Qin Beihan glanced at the distant Supremacy Lu and said indifferently, "What a great move." Supremacy Lu's face was expressionless. "After so many years, your sword in the sleeve has improved a lot." Qin Beihan smiled. "Then let's continue." As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward. In an instant, over 100 energy swords suddenly appeared behind him. Qin Beihan pressed his fingers together and pointed at Supremacy Lu. "Go." As soon as he spoke, the 100 energy swords shot out, and in an instant, the entire layer of clouds in the sky was instantly torn into pieces by the energy swords. At the same time, rays of dazzling sword light blotted out the sky and covered the entire horizon. On the other side, Supremacy Lu's face was expressionless. He stretched out his right hand, and it didn't take long for an illusory shield to suddenly appear in his palm. In the next moment, the illusory shield expanded with the wind and instantly reached a height of over 100 zhang. Ripples kept appearing on the surface of this huge shield, like ripples on water. Soon the energy swords slashed down. Boom, boom, boom. Deafening explosions resounded in the sky once more. At this moment the clouds in the sky shook violently, and cracks even appeared in the space in some places. Just like that, the explosions continued for a very, very long time before the sky gradually calmed down. However, it wasn't long before more explosions resounded. Below, Xian took a deep breath. An expert. At this moment he deeply realized that he was actually still very weak. He hadn't realized this in the past because he hadn't seen the true experts of the firmament world. All this time he had thought that he was very strong. In fact, he wasn't strong at all. At this moment he was somewhat glad that he hadn't challenged Old Man Lu to a duel. Otherwise he would definitely have been beaten to tears. However, he wouldn't belittle himself. He was still young. If he was given some time, let alone Supremacy Lu, he could even fight the mysterious woman. When he thought of this, Xian was instantly filled with confidence. It was as if there was no one in this world that Xian couldn't defeat. In fact, he had no idea how strong the mysterious woman was. As if he had thought of something, Xian glanced at the prison pagoda. At this moment, Xiao had run to the top of the pagoda. Xiao seemed to be hugging a box. She was mumbling something to the box and seemed to be very happy. At this moment, Xiao seemed to sense something. She hurriedly put away the box and glared at him. "Don't peek at me." Xian. After a while, Xian didn't bother with this little girl anymore. This little girl had been very mysterious lately. He would ask her when he was free in the future. Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. There, the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance were already fighting with Master Yuqi and the others. Although the Pale Sword Sect had fewer people, Xian discovered that the Pale Sword Sect's battle strength was extremely strong. They weren't at a disadvantage at all. Swordsman. One had to know that swordsman's battle strength had always been very strong. He had to do something. Xian looked around and was about to make a move. At this moment he seemed to think of something and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. In the distance, Yuqi was fighting with 3 true Imperial Dharma Realm experts. Yuqi wasn't just at the true Imperial Dharma Realm, he was also a sword immortal. For an expert like her, one true Imperial Dharma Realm expert couldn't possibly stand against her. 3 true Imperial Dharma Realm experts could only barely stand against her. At this moment there was a sudden change. The true Imperial Dharma Realm expert on Yuqi's left suddenly had a drastic change in expression. He turned around abruptly, and at this moment, a sword silently pierced through his throat. The The true Imperial Dharma Realm expert's head flew straight into the air. Sensing this scene, the other two true Imperial Dharma Realm experts' expressions changed drastically as they retreated. The two looked around warily. There was no one around them. Soon, cold sweat appeared on their foreheads. At this moment, one of them suddenly turned around. However, there was nothing in front of him. This person clenched his fists tightly and said fiercely, "Who is it? Come out, old man." There was no response. At this moment, Yu Qi, who was not far away, suddenly drew his sword. The two's expressions changed slightly as they hurriedly turned around. The moment they turned around, a sword silently pierced through the back of the old man who had just spoken. Fresh blood spurted out from the old man's neck. Chapter 317. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. The other old man looked around in horror. At this moment, his heart was already extremely shocked. Because the old man had died right beside him, but he hadn't discovered who had done it. It wasn't just him, even Yu Qi was slightly taken aback. Who was it? In her impression, the Blue Sword sect did not have any assassins. And at this time, 100 zhang away, the head of a true defending magic realm expert of the Realm Protection Alliance suddenly flew off. Blood gushed out like a fountain. After a few breaths, 200 feet to the right, a true control Dharma realm cultivator of the Realm Defense Alliance was pierced through the heart by a sword. Just like that, in less than a dozen breaths of time, 5 experts from the Realm Defense Alliance had perished. At this moment, all the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance panicked. They weren't afraid of fighting in the open, but they had to be afraid of this kind of dirty trick in the dark. Because it was impossible to guard against. Furthermore, it was so mysterious. There was no trace of it at all. In next to no time, the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance stopped in succession and moved closer to each other. At this moment, they didn't just have to face the experts of the Pale Sword sect, they also had to be on guard against those hidden in the shadows. It could be said that they were too distracted, so their strength was greatly reduced. As a result, the Realm Protection Alliance was at a complete disadvantage. Seeing that the situation was not good, Mo Xiu hurriedly informed Supreme Lord Lu. However, he did not receive a reply. This was because Qin Beihan had pinned down Supremacy Lu. Neither of them dared to be distracted in their battle. One moment of carelessness and he would be consigned to eternal damnation. The members of the Pale Sword sect were stunned as well because they didn't know who was helping them from the shadows. But it didn't matter, it was a good thing anyway. On the desolate mountain range, the battle was still ongoing. However, the Realm Defense Alliance was completely suppressed and could only passively defend. In the sky, the battle between Lord Lu and Qin Beihan was still going on, and there was still no clear winner. In the dark, Yi Xian did not attack again because the experts of the Realm Protection Alliance had already gathered together. If he were to attack now, they would definitely join hands to deal with him first. Now he could only wait for the right opportunity. In any case, it was the Realm Protection Alliance that should be anxious. Just like that, the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance died one after another. Although the Pale Sword sect had also sacrificed some people, it was far less than the Realm Defense Alliance. An hour later, a deafening explosion suddenly resounded in the sky above the clouds. Very quickly, 2 figures fell from the sky and landed on the ground. Boom! The entire ground shook violently and the place where the 2 of them landed directly collapsed. Everyone stopped and looked at Lord Lu and Qin Beihan. If a victor was decided between the 2 of them, it would mean that the battle was about to end. On the ground, Qin Beihan waved his sleeves, then looked at Supremacy Lu, who was not far away, and said with a smile, "Supremacy Lu, I'm afraid it won't take a few days and nights for us to fight to the death." Supremacy Lu stared fixedly at Qin Beihan with a malevolent expression. "If you don't hand over Yi Xian, I guarantee you that your Pale Sword sect will be annihilated." Qin Beihan smiled and said, "Your Realm Defense Alliance has been trying to destroy my Pale Sword sect for a long time. But my Pale Sword sect is still doing fine, isn't it?" Supremacy Lu sneered, "Qin Beihan, you will pay a painful price for your foolish actions." With that, he swept his eyes around. "Yi Xian, I know you're hiding in the dark. Let me tell you, if you don't hand over the Origin Heart, my Realm Defense Alliance will hunt you down for eternity. No one will be able to protect you." With that, he looked at Qin Beihan. "Just you wait." With that, the group of people turned and left. A moment later, all the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance disappeared into the horizon. Below, Qin Beihan looked up at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking. A moment later he suddenly said, "Where's Yi Xian?" "I'm here." At this time, a voice suddenly sounded from afar. Everyone looked over and saw that it was Yi Xian. At this moment Yi Xian was grinning, but no one knew what he was smiling about. Seeing Yi Xian, everyone shook their heads and smiled. This guy was really slippery at times. Yi Xian walked over to Qin Beihan and bowed slightly. "Sect leader." Qin Beihan nodded slightly. "Come with me." With that he walked into the distance. Yi Xian hurriedly followed. Beside him Yu Qi hesitated for a moment but also followed. On a hill Qin Beihan stared at Yi Xian. "Is the origin heart with you?" Yi Xian nodded. Seeing this, Yu Qi couldn't help but glance at Yi Xian. She wanted to say something, but in the end she didn't say anything. Qin Beihan's expression became slightly complicated. The Realm Defense Alliance went through so much trouble to obtain the origin heart, but I didn't expect it to fall into your hands in the end." Yi Xian said with a smile. "Fate." Qin Beihan hesitated for a moment and then said, "I want to destroy this origin heart to avoid future troubles." "Destroy it?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. No. At the thought of destroying Shaoling, Yi Xian really couldn't bear to do it, but he couldn't do it. Although that girl was a bit mischievous, she wasn't a bad person. Qin Beihan glanced at Yi Xian. "If I don't destroy it, I'm afraid something big will happen in the future." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Sect leader, the origin heart is only willing to follow me because I promised to protect it. If I want to destroy it now, I can't do it. As a person, I have to be trustworthy, right?" Qin Beihan was silent for a moment and then asked, "It followed you willingly?" Yi Xian nodded. Qin Beihan looked deeply at Yi Xian. "You?" Needless to say, he was still slightly shocked at this moment. Because he'd truly never imagined that the Qingzhou's origin heart would actually follow Yi Xian. It should be known that this kind of spiritual object in general was very resistant to humans. Mysterious. The feeling he got from Yi Xian had always been one of mystery. A short moment later, Qin Beihan spoke in a low voice. "The Realm Defense Alliance should have guessed that it's you, and they won't let the matter rest. You must return to Pale Sword Sect with me." Yu Qi nodded. "Yes." Qin Beihan continued. "If you stay in Qingzhou, then you won't be able to protect yourself at all. I'll give you half a day to deal with the matter in Qingzhou. It's best if you make those friends of yours go into hiding or return to Pale Sword Sect with me." When he spoke up to here, there was a trace of worry in his eyes. For the sake of this origin heart, the Realm Defense Alliance will definitely do anything. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment and then he said, "If I go to Pale Sword Sect, then the Realm Defense Alliance will definitely act madly against Pale Sword Sect." This? Qin Beihan shook his head. "You're already a disciple of my Pale Sword Sect, so your matters are naturally my Pale Sword Sect's matters. Moreover, even without you, once the Realm Defense Alliance achieves its objective, they still won't let my Pale Sword Sect off. Quickly go deal with your own matters and we'll return to the Central Divine Prefecture in half a day." Yi Xian intended to say something else when Yu Qi suddenly said, "Quickly go. Don't waste any time." Yi Xian smiled and then he turned around and left. After Yi Xian left, Qin Beihan spoke softly. "I never expected that the origin heart would actually fall into his hands." Yu Qi gazed at Qin Beihan. "Don't use him." Qin Beihan shook his head and smiled. "Little junior sister, do you think your second senior brother is such a heartless person in your heart?" Yu Qi spoke softly. "He isn't a bad person. If he's willing to stay in my Pale Sword Sect, then his accomplishments in the future wouldn't be inferior to eldest senior brothers." Qin Beihan nodded. "I know. That kid's biggest problem is that he acts on impulse. If he doesn't manage the affairs of the sect and wholeheartedly cultivates, then his accomplishments in the future will definitely not be inferior to eldest senior brothers. But if he becomes the next sect master, then I'm afraid he'll lead the Pale Sword Sect to fight every day." Yu Qi shook her head slightly. She had a rough understanding of Yi Xian's character, and he really wasn't an ordinary kind of irritable person. Even though he usually laughed and laughed, was thick-skinned and sometimes even schemed a little, but if he was infuriated, then he would erupt like a volcano. Qin Beihan suddenly said, "Forget it, these are matters for the future. It's too early to talk about it now." As he spoke he looked at Yu Qi. "Do you know who attacked from the shadows earlier?" Yu Qi shook her head. Qin Beihan nodded and didn't say anything. On the other hand, Yu Qi glanced in the direction that Yi Xian had left in. After leaving the desolate mountain range, Yi Xian returned to Ning Kingdom at the first possible moment. In Tuoba Yan's chamber. Tuoba Yan looked at Yi Xian and frowned slightly. Hide. Yi Xian nodded. Both of you must. Otherwise both of you can come with me to the Pale Sword sect. Tuoba Yan and Ji Anji exchanged glances. In the end Tuoba Yan spoke solemnly. Is it very serious? Yi Xian nodded. Very serious. The Realm Defense Alliance is probably going to fight me to the death this time. Just as Qin Beihan had said, he could sense how much the Realm Defense Alliance valued the Origin Heart. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to hand it over to the Realm Defense Alliance. Because even if he did, the Realm Defense Alliance wouldn't let him and the Pale Sword sect off. Moreover, if he did hand it over to the Realm Defense Alliance, then who knew what terrifying things the Realm Defense Alliance would use it to do. So he and the Realm Defense Alliance were irreconcilable enemies now. Tuoba Yan fell silent for a moment and then he said, I want to stay here. However, Ji and I will go into hiding. Yi Xian spoke softly, you don't want to go to the Pale Sword sect with me? Tuoba Yan shook his head. If we leave just like this, then what will happen to Ning country? Even though I will have to hide if I stay here, I can manage Ning country in secret. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he nodded. All right. However, both of you must not show yourselves. Besides that, notify the others of Blue Waves Academy to not show themselves. Tuoba Yan looked at Yi Xian. You have to be careful, understand? Yi Xian smiled. Don't worry, I won't die. As soon as he finished speaking, he hugged Tuoba Yan lightly. Wait for me to return. As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something, and he hugged Ji Anji once more before turning around and leaving. You will definitely return, right? Tuoba Yan asked. Yi Xian stopped and smiled. Wait for me. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished through the door. Within the hall, Tuoba Yan stared at the door for a long time and didn't leave. Half a day later, a huge event occurred in Firmament World. The Realm Defense Alliance declared war on the Pale Sword sect. Chapter 318. The Realm Defense Alliance had declared war on the Pale Sword sect. Before this, although the two families had already started fighting, they did not openly declare war on each other. But this time the Realm Defense Alliance had declared war. This meant that both sides had no other choice but to fight to the death. As for Yi Xian, he followed Qin Beihan and the others back to the Pale Sword sect. At this moment the Pale Sword sect had entered the highest level of alert. All the disciples were on standby. Because the Realm Defense Alliance could attack at any time. Cloudsword Peak. Yi Xian was helping Yu Qi tidy up the sword techniques and notes in the inner hall. What Yu Qi did every day was to study these sword techniques, make notes and sometimes improve them. One had to admit that following Yu Qi really did allow one to learn many things every day. As for Yi Xian, he wasn't always at the Cloudy Sword Hall. The current him was already familiar with the Blue Sword sect. From time to time he would stroll around here and there. Every day he was very carefree. But after returning to the Central Divine Continent, the Realm Defense Alliance was strangely calm, without the slightest movement. Realm Defense Mountain. High Lord Lu arrived at the rear hall. There was a black vortex in the rear hall, and within it was a boundless starry sky. High Lord Lu walked up to the vortex and bowed slightly. High Lord. A moment later, a voice came from within. Failed. High Lord Lu nodded. Failed, but I know who has it. After a moment of silence, the voice suddenly said, at all costs, understand? High Lord Lu nodded slightly. I might need my lord's help when the time comes. There is a mysterious woman behind that person who once told my lord. She's no ordinary person. He appears. Didn't I give you a clone? The voice asked. High Lord Lu smiled bitterly. He wanted to say that this clone was far from enough, but he didn't dare say it. After hesitating for a moment, High Lord Lu nodded. Understood. But I'm worried that the mysterious woman isn't ordinary and has some other power behind her. So just in case, I ask my lord to give me another clone. The voice said, I've only managed to cultivate 2 clones. I've given one to you, but I have other uses for the other one. If you don't have the confidence, I'll let my left and right protectors come and assist you. Hearing this, Lord Lu quickly nodded. That's great. Apart from that, I would also like to request for a group of golden guards. I only need 10 of them. After a moment of silence, the voice said, approved. Supremacy Lu heaved a sigh of relief. This way the Grey Mye Sword sect would be more confident. In the endless starry sky, a star cloud ship suddenly stopped. Not far away from the star cloud ship was an ancient city, and in the sky above the ancient city, there were 3 large words: Realm Defense Alliance. On the nebula warship stood an old man and a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man glanced at the ancient city in the distance and said softly, "This star field is under the control of the Realm Protection Alliance?" The old man nodded. This Realm Protection Alliance was not simple in the past. Its founder was just an ordinary young man, but he created a new cultivation method. This method was the power of faith. The more devout the people's faith in him, the stronger his martial Tao was. Unfortunately, saying this, he shook his head and sighed. After that person, no other amazing talent appeared in the Realm Protection Alliance. As a result, its power is not as great as before. Now it can only be considered a third-rate faction. The middle-aged man smiled. This has nothing to do with us. Our mission this time is to find that young man. To find a person in this vast star field is more than 100 times harder than finding a needle in a haystack. Our Spirit Void Star Palace is really unlucky this time. Hearing this, the old man smiled bitterly. There's nothing we can do. That mysterious woman descended from the sky and found us. Who told us that we can't beat her? Hearing the old man's words, the middle-aged man smiled bitterly. They couldn't beat her. They couldn't beat her at all. That mysterious woman's strength had completely exceeded their understanding. A moment later, the middle-aged man said softly, "Let's go." As his voice sounded out, the star cloud ship flew above the Realm Protection City. Soon, a black-clothed old man appeared before the star cloud ship. The black-clothed old man looked warily at the middle-aged man and the old man. "You two are?" The middle-aged man smiled. "I am Spirit Void Star Palace's Lin Tsongyun. This is my Spirit Void Star Palace's enforcer, Xianxia." Spirit Void Star Palace? The black-clothed old man frowned deeply. "I've never heard of it." Lin Tsongyun smiled. "My Spirit Void Star Palace is too far from this star field. It's normal that you have never heard of it." As he spoke, he released his powerful aura. Beside him, Xianxia also released his aura. Seeing the two's auras, the black-clothed old man's expression changed. "You two?" Lin Tsongyun smiled. "We have no ill intentions. We just want to ask your Realm Protection Alliance for a small favor." "A small favor?" The black-clothed old man hesitated for a moment before saying, "What favor?" Lin Tsongyun said in a low voice, "To find someone." As he spoke, he waved his right hand and a portrait appeared in front of the black-clothed old man. If Zhou Xian was here, he would definitely be shocked because the person in the portrait looked exactly like him. The black-clothed old man said in a low voice, "Do you have an exact location?" Lin Tsongyun shook his head. "No." Hearing this, the black-clothed old man shook his head. "It's too difficult." Lin Tsongyun smiled bitterly. "The two of us know that it's too difficult, but there's nothing we can do about it. This person is extremely important to my Spirit Void Star Palace. Please help us." The black-clothed old man glanced at the two of them. He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I will send people to search. However, the old man cannot guarantee that he will definitely be found." Lin Tsongyun smiled. "Thank you very much." As he spoke, he looked down. "The two of us would like to stay here for a period of time. Is that convenient?" The black-clothed old man smiled. "Of course." As he spoke, he hesitated for a moment before saying, "My Realm Defense Alliance is about to go to war with another power. If it's convenient for the two of you, I hope that you can lend us a hand. What do you think?" Lin Tsongyun and Lin Tsongyun looked at each other. Lin Tsongyun smiled. "Of course. However, the matter of finding someone," the black-clothed old man said seriously, "don't worry. My Realm Defense Alliance will do its best to find that person. If that person is in this star region, then my Realm Defense Alliance will definitely be able to find him." Lin Tsongyun smiled. "Thank you very much." The black-clothed old man smiled lightly. "Please follow me." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and left. His face was filled with a smile. Lin Tsongyun and Xianxia were obviously not ordinary experts. When the two of them participated in the battle, the Firmament Sword sect would definitely be destroyed. When he thought of this, the black-clothed old man's smile grew even brighter, and he became even more courteous towards Lin Tsongyun and Xianxia. The Firmament World. Xian strolled around here and there every day. In the end he arrived at the sword tomb. When the old man who guarded the sword tomb saw Xian, his eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly stood in front of Xian and said cautiously, "What are you doing?" He hadn't forgotten that Xian had devoured many swords when he came here, and there were even heaven-grade swords among them. This fellow can devour swords. Xian chuckled. "Nothing, I'm just here to stroll around." The old man said indifferently, "There's nothing to stroll around here. Go back." Xian said seriously, "I'm just going in for a stroll. I have no other intentions." The old man glanced at Xian with an expressionless face. "No." Xian sighed softly. He had no choice but to turn around and leave. Actually, he could sneak in silently, but it would be too boring to do that. Heaven-grade swords. What he needed the most right now was a heaven-grade sword. As long as he had a heaven-grade sword, he could enter the true defense realm at any time. Once he entered the true defense realm, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Other than that, he had yet to condense the Sword of Space. Other than the World Prison Pagoda, his strongest attack was the Sword of Earth. If he could successfully condense the Sword of Earth and use life and death in one sword, he was 90% confident that he could instantly kill a true defense realm powerhouse. The Tao of Space was clearly above the Tao of Earth. If he could condense the Sword of Space, it would definitely be even more powerful. But now he wasn't confident that he could condense the Sword of Space. Because his cultivation level wasn't high enough. He had to reach the true defense realm. And he needed swords. Where could he find swords? The sword tomb was out of the question. This was because this place was the accumulation of the Pale Sword sect. If those swords were left there, they could improve the swordsmanship of the Pale Sword sect disciples. He definitely couldn't let him continue devouring. He had to think of something else. Who was he thinking of? Xian thought for a moment. Soon he came to Weapon Forging Peak. Sword Dao Xian. Zhang Tai said impatiently, "What are you doing here again?" Xian grinned. "I'm here to pay my respects to Uncle Master Zhan." Frem. Zhang Tai waved his hand. "Scram quickly, I have nothing here." After he finished speaking, he turned around and disappeared on the spot. Xian. A moment later, Xian came to Array Dao Peak. Inside the hall, Xian walked to Uncle Master Gu and bowed. "Greetings, Uncle Master Gu." Uncle Master Gu glanced at Xian. "What's the matter?" Xian hesitated. "There's something, but it's a little hard to say." Uncle Master Gu said indifferently, "Then don't say it." Xian's face darkened. Why didn't this Uncle Master Gu play by the rules? After hesitating for a moment, he said, "I want a heaven-grade sword." Uncle Master Gu glanced at him. "There's only one. I'll use it myself, do you want it?" Xian smiled bitterly. How could he want it? He bowed slightly, then turned and left. At this moment, Uncle Master Gu suddenly said, "Go find your master, she has a way." Xian was stunned, then he hurriedly flew out of the hall. Soon he returned to Cloud Sword Peak. In the hall, Yuqi was silent for a moment, then she turned and walked into the inner hall. After a while she walked out again, waved her right hand, and two swords landed steadily in front of him. Heaven-grade sword. Xian was stunned, then he said embarrassedly, Still, isn't it enough?" Yuqi asked. Xian hurriedly nodded. He could be thick-skinned to everyone, but when it came to Yuqi, he really couldn't be thick-skinned. Yuqi was silent for a moment, then she said, "Follow me." After saying that, she brought Xian to the sword tomb. Seeing Xian, the old guard of the sword tomb was stunned, but he ignored Xian and looked at Yuqi with a somewhat kind expression. "Little junior sister, why are you here today?" Yuqi said indifferently, "Give me a few heaven-grade swords." The old man glanced at Xian, a little hesitant. "Is there a problem?" Yuqi asked. The old man hurriedly said, "No problem, I'll go get it for you." After saying that, he turned and left. At the side, Xian was dumbfounded. P.S. Actually, I know many people have been dissatisfied recently, because there are fewer updates. But to be honest, everyone has a holiday for the new year, but what we write really doesn't have a holiday. It's year-round. It's not an excuse, I just want to explain to my friends who understand. After all, it's the new year and I'm still in the hospital now waiting for my father's wound to heal. I don't know how long it will take. If you can understand, then understand, but if you can't, then scold. Thank you. Chapter 319. In a short while, the old man walked out of the sword tomb with a box in his hand. The old man passed the box to Yuqi. She opened it and saw 4 swords. All of them were heaven grade. Yu Qi turned around and passed the box to Yi Xian. Is it enough? Is it enough? The old man's eyes twitched when he heard Yu Qi's words. Yi Xian thought about it and said, it should be enough. Yu Qi turned to look at the old man. Give me another one. The old man was speechless. Yi Xian was speechless. A moment later the old man took out another one. It was also a heaven-grade sword. Thus Yi Xian obtained 5 swords in one go. Yu Qi didn't say anything and just turned around and left. Yi Xian was silent for a long time before he grinned. This master is really nice. He felt very warm in his heart. Yu Qi didn't ask what he wanted the swords for. This was trust. This feeling of being trusted and believed in was really good. The old man glanced at Yi Xian with an ugly expression. He didn't say anything and just turned around and left. Yi Xian had to admit that he was a little emotional at the moment. He didn't know why Yu Qi wanted so many heaven-grade swords, but he knew that without Yu Qi he definitely wouldn't be able to obtain so many heaven-grade swords. At this moment he realized why so many people wanted to join some big powers. Because big powers really had a lot of resources and they were very good. If he was still an independent cultivator, even if he had 10 billion top-grade spirit stones, he wouldn't be able to buy 5 heaven-grade swords. It's good to have an organization and a backer. It's too tiring to fight alone. I have to find more backers in the future. Yi Xian grinned, turned around and left with the sword in his arms. Yi Xian returned to his room on Cloud Sword Peak and then entered the prison pagoda. Devour. Inside the prison pagoda, as soon as she saw Yi Xian enter, Xiao Linger hurriedly put away the box. She looked at Yi Xian warily. I didn't do anything. Yi Xian was speechless. Thinking that Yi Xian didn't believe her, she quickly added, I really didn't do anything. All right. Yi Xian waved his hand. I know you didn't do anything. Now I want to cultivate, don't disturb me, understand? Little Ling nodded her little head, not really understanding. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, then took out a heaven-rank sword and stabbed it into his chest. Upon seeing this, Xiao Linger's eyes widened in shock. She covered her mouth with her small hands in shock. Once the heaven-grade sword entered his body, a powerful energy immediately spread out from his body. Soon his body began to absorb this energy frantically. Invincible sword body. He remembered that the mysterious woman had once said that if he cultivated this technique to the end, his body would be like a sword and no sword could penetrate it. As for when he would be able to cultivate to the end, he didn't know. In any case, he just had to cultivate first. At the side, Xiao Linger was dumbfounded. She flew around Yi Xian, touching Yi Xian from time to time. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. As if she had thought of something, she suddenly floated to the box in front of Yi Xian. Then she grabbed at the air with her 2 small hands. Soon a sword slowly floated up. Then under her control the sword was pointed at herself. Just as the sword was about to stab down, a force suddenly enveloped Xiao Linger. Xiao Linger was stunned. At this time a voice sounded from the first floor. What are you doing? It was the voice of the god on the second floor. Xiao Linger blinked. Playing. Who plays like you? The voice of the god on the second floor was a little harsh. Xiao Linger pointed at Yi Xian. He plays too. The god on the second floor was speechless. At this time Xiao Linger suddenly floated to the second floor and saw the god on the second floor. Around the body of the second floor great god, there were strange golden runes. These runes were like ropes that trapped the second floor great god. Xiao Linger floated in front of the god on the second floor, giggling. Then she took out a spirit fruit and handed it to the god on the second floor. The god on the second floor glanced at Xiao Linger and didn't say anything. Xiao Linger hesitated for a moment, then said, The guy on the 4th floor asked me to pull out the 3 swords at the top of the tower to play. Can I pull them out? Hearing this, the god on the second floor's eyes twitched. Azure Sword Hall. There were only 3 people in the hall, Qin Beihan, Zhou Xian and Zhan Tai. Qin Beihan looked at Zhou Xian. Still no movement from the Realm Defense Alliance? Zhou Xian shook his head. No. But according to my guess, it won't be long before they make a big move. Qin Beihan nodded slightly. The Celestial Sect of Wonders and the few sects in the upper world have not responded? Zhou Xian smiled bitterly. If it doesn't affect their interests, why would they make a move? Moreover, at this time, everyone can't wait for our Azure Sword sect to fight to the death with the Realm Defense Alliance so they can reap the benefits. Qin Beihan said softly, It seems that our Azure Sword sect can only rely on ourselves this time. As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing. I'll have to trouble junior sister Gu for the next few days. Ask her to fix the two formations, especially the one left behind by the ancestral master. She must fix it. This matter is urgent. Zhou Xian nodded. I understand. Junior sister Gu should also understand. She has been busy with this matter recently. Qin Beihan suddenly asked, what about eldest senior brother? Eldest senior brother. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's and Zhang Tai's expressions changed subtly. Zhou Xian smiled bitterly. Of course, after he sent Shang Yu and Bo Yi back to the sect, there was no news of him. But if our Azure Sword sect is in trouble, he will definitely help. Qin Beihan nodded. Of course, he went to the demon race because he doesn't want Shang Yu to die there. He is afraid that our Azure Sword sect will have no successor. As for him, let's not bother about him for the time being. He will definitely appear when it's time. Zhou Xian smiled. That's true. Now that the war between our Azure Sword sect and the Realm Defense Alliance is imminent, there's no way he won't appear. Qin Beihan said softly, I just don't know what trump card the Realm Defense Alliance has this time. This battle concerns the life and death of our Azure Sword sect. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's and Zhang Tai's expressions turned grave. Life and death. If Azure Sword sect lost this battle, there was no need for the Realm Defense Alliance to take action. The other forces of the Divine Central Continent would completely devour Azure Sword sect. The Azure Sword sect couldn't afford to lose this battle. A moment later, Qin Beihan said in a low voice, if necessary, tell Yi Xian, Shang Yu, Nangong and the others to leave. No matter what happens to us, Azure Sword sect cannot be destroyed. Zhou Xian nodded. Understood. Any force would leave behind a few seeds. Qin Beihan slowly closed his eyes, while Zhou Xian and Zhang Tai got up and left. Only Qin Beihan was left in the hall. A moment later, a black-robed man suddenly appeared in the hall. The black-robed man glanced at Qin Beihan and shook his head. Qin Beihan said softly, never mind, there's no need to investigate. Since I have chosen to believe, I can only believe until the end. The black-robed man nodded and quietly left. Cloud Sword Peak. Inside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian was still frantically devouring. He had already devoured 3 heaven-class swords. The aura around his body was growing stronger and stronger. Inside the prison pagoda, some people were happy while others were worried. The happy one was naturally Xiaolinger. She was unrestrained every day and could stroll around the pagoda as she pleased. There was even food to eat. The worried one was the god on the 2nd floor. Because Yi Xian had activated the prison pagoda time and time again, the seal on the prison pagoda was weakening. Logically speaking, she should be happy because the loosening of the seal was beneficial to her. But she knew very well that if the seal in the pagoda completely disappeared, the people in the pagoda would definitely kill Yi Xian first. Once he was killed, no one in the pagoda would survive. In the entire pagoda, only 2 people knew of the mysterious woman's existence. One was her and the other was the other. However, the other party was very arrogant and had threatened to find the mysterious woman for revenge. From her point of view, this was a joke. The strength displayed by the mysterious woman was just the tip of the iceberg. Moreover, according to her guess, the reason the prison pagoda had fallen into such a state was probably related to the mysterious woman. They actually didn't know when the mysterious woman had come to the prison pagoda. This was because when they were imprisoned, the prison pagoda was in perfect condition. The seal at that time could make them sleep forever until they died. Therefore, even the people in the pagoda didn't know what had happened to the prison pagoda to turn out like this. All they knew was that when they woke up, the prison pagoda was heavily damaged and the seal was weakening. Moreover, it had a master, and this master was King Weak. To put it simply, other than the god on the 2nd floor and the person who was being suppressed by the mysterious woman, no one else knew that there was such a powerful person behind Yi Xian. The pagoda would break, Yi Xian would die, and before long, everyone would die with him. After a moment, the god on the 2nd floor looked at Yi Xian, who was on the 1st floor. Right now, Yi Xian's aura had reached an extremely powerful level. If this aura was outside, it would definitely cause a commotion. But in the prison pagoda, no matter how strong his aura was, it would be suppressed by the pagoda. Days passed in this way. On the 3rd day, Yi Xian, sitting on the ground with his legs crossed, suddenly opened his eyes. Swoosh swoosh. Two rays of sword light suddenly shot out like lightning. At the same time, a powerful aura suddenly emitted from his body. Xian waved his right hand and the aura suddenly disappeared without a trace. Disintegration. Spatial flying sword. True defense realm. Finally, he had reached the true defense realm. Inside the pagoda, Xian took a deep breath. At this moment he felt like his body was filled with power. Not only that, but at this moment his mental energy and divine sense were vastly different from before. It was as if everything around him had become clearer. Moreover, he could clearly sense space. As long as he wanted to, he could change the space around him at any time. It was a very casual kind of change. True defense realm. The corner of Xian's lips curled up slightly. Now he had finally reached the true defense realm. However, Xian still had one question. Was he a sword immortal? Chapter 320. Now as long as he was willing, his sword will could transform into heaven and earth. However, whether this was a sword immortal or not, he still did not know. After a moment of silence, Xian decided to ask Yu Qi. At this time, the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly sounded in his mind. Be careful of the one on the fourth floor. The fourth floor? Xian was stunned. What do you mean? The god on the second floor said. It asked Xiaolinger to pull out the sword. Pull out the sword. Hearing this, Xian's face suddenly darkened. Pull out the sword. It must be the sword at the top of the tower. If those swords were pulled out, who knew what would happen? Xian hurriedly called Xiaolinger in front of him. He said seriously, the guy on the fourth floor, it asked you to pull out the sword? Xiaolinger nibbled on a spirit fruit, then nodded her little head. Yes, it said the sword is fun. Xian said seriously, what do you think? Xiaolinger looked at Xian, blinked. As she said this, her eyeballs rolled. At this time Xian said, don't lie. Xiaolinger hesitated, then giggled. I want to pull it out and play with it, then put it back, Ken? Xian was speechless. What do you think? Xiaolinger suddenly clapped her hands, her eyes lit up. You agree? Xian was dumbfounded. Did he agree? At this time Xiaolinger directly flew out, then climbed to the top of the tower. Xian hurriedly dragged her back. Looking at the little one in front of him, Xian was speechless. How did this little one understand his words? Xian took a deep breath, then said seriously, that sword you can't pull it out, understand? He did not know whether Xiaolinger could pull it out, but what if she could? If it was pulled out, it would be a big problem. Hearing Xian's words, Xiaolinger blinked and asked curiously, why not? Xian said solemnly, if we pull it out, something big will happen. Oh, little Ling, nodded her little head, looking as if she understood. Seeing Xiaolinger nod, Xian heaved a sigh of relief. At this time she said, if I can't pull it out today, can I pull it out tomorrow? Xian nearly fainted when he heard that. Why did this little guy keep thinking about drawing his sword? In the end, Xian was completely defeated by this little fellow. He didn't care about this little guy anymore. He could only ask the second floor's god to pay more attention to this little guy. If he didn't get killed by the Realm Protection Alliance, he would be toyed to death by this little fellow. After leaving the World Prison Pagoda, Xian came to the Cloudy Sword Hall. Inside the hall, Yu Qi was studying a sword technique. Her brows were slightly furrowed as if she was thinking about something. Just as Xian was about to speak, Yu Qi suddenly said, what's the matter? Xian nodded. Speak. I suspect I'm a sword immortal. Yu Qi put down the scroll in her hand and turned to look at Xian. Sword immortal? Xian nodded. Just a suspicion. I'm not sure. Yu Qi walked in front of Xian and looked at Xian. Xian moved his mind and in an instant, the entire room was filled with his good and evil sword intent. Seeing this scene, Yu Qi was stunned. Xian asked softly, is it a sword immortal? Yu Qi glanced at Xian and shook her head. Not completely, only half. Xian. At this time Yu Qi suddenly said, true imperial lore realm. In her eyes there was a trace of disbelief. Xian grinned, that's the use of the 5 swords. Yu Qi looked deeply at Xian and said softly, I still underestimated you. With that she pulled Xian's arm and immediately left the Cloudy Sword Hall. Under Yu Qi's lead, Xian came to the back mountain of the Cloudy Sword Peak. Xian had also been to this back mountain before. There was a bamboo forest and a sea of flowers which seemed to be planted by Yu Qi. In the bamboo forest, Yu Qi looked at Xian. Release your sword intent. Yi Xian nodded and then released his sword intent. In an instant the entire forest was filled with his sword intent. After a moment of silence, Yu Qi said softly, "Do you know what stage you are at now?" Yi Xian shook his head. Yu Qi said softly, "The first stage is to comprehend sword intent, the second stage is to materialize sword intent, and the third stage is to transform sword intent into heaven and earth." The so-called transforming sword intent into heaven and earth means that your sword intent is no longer limited to your body, but can already fuse with heaven and earth. In other words, before your body was actually a limit to your sword intent, but now your sword intent has broken through this limit and has infinite possibilities. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Isn't that a sword immortal?" Yu Qi shook his head, "Only half." "Why do you say that?" Yi Xian asked. Yu Qi said softly, "To become a sword immortal, transforming sword intent into heaven and earth is only the first step, and the most important step is the second, which is the heart of the sword." Heart of the sword? Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Yu Qi explained, "Right now you have a clear heart of the sword, which means that your heart of the sword is flawless, but to become a sword immortal, you need not only a clear heart of the sword but also a bright heart of the sword." Bright heart of the sword. Yi Xian frowned slightly. A state of mind? Yu Qi nodded. A state of mind that is extremely difficult to understand. Moreover, everyone's state of mind is different, so no one's bright heart of the sword might be different. Of course, different paths lead to the same goal and the final result is the same. Yi Xian asked, "Is this bright heart of the sword difficult?" Yu Qi nodded, "Difficult." The senior brother who guards the sword tomb has been stuck here for more than 10 years. More than 10 years. Yi Xian's expression turned bitter. More than 10 years. This meant that to become a sword immortal he would probably have to continue enduring. At this moment Yu Qi suddenly laughed. "You don't need to be discouraged. For you to be able to reach half-step sword immortal at this age, you are already a genius. You must know that before eldest senior brother's realm dropped, he was also slightly inferior to you." Yi Xian laughed. "If I were a sword immortal now, I would be of great help to the sect." Yu Qi lightly patted him on the shoulder. "I'm very happy that you think like this, but you don't have to worry too much about the sect's matters. Us older generation will solve these matters ourselves. What you need to do now is to cultivate properly, understand?" Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then said, "What are our chances of winning?" Yu Qi shook his head. "I don't know. In any case, even if the chances of winning are 0, we still have to fight. We have no other choice." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Yu Qi said, "If there's nothing else, you can go to the depths of the sword tomb. The founding ancestor once cultivated there, and the existence of the founding ancestor's sword intent should be helpful to you." Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "The martial uncle who guards the sword tomb won't let me go." Why? Yu Qi was slightly puzzled. Yi Xian laughed awkwardly. "I went there once and devoured some swords." Yu Qi frowned. "I only devoured some swords. You are one of us. Is a person not as important as a sword? Come with me." After that Yu Qi brought Yi Xian to the sword tomb again. Seeing Yu Qi and Yi Xian, the elder's eyelids twitched. He hurriedly walked to Yu Qi and smiled. "Little junior sister, why are you free to come here today?" Yu Qi glanced at the elder. "Senior brother Lin Qiu, why can't my disciple come to the sword tomb? Why, do you have a problem with me?" The elder called Lin Qiu laughed bitterly. "Little junior sister, what are you talking about? It's just that you know the rules here. You have to get the sect leader's approval before you can enter." Yu Qi frowned. "Are you using second senior brother to pressure me?" Lin Qiu's smile became even more bitter. "Little junior sister, we are from the same sect. If you say that Yu Qi was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Uncle Master Lin Qiu, I devoured the swords without your approval previously. It was my fault. I apologize to Uncle Master here." Lin Qiu glanced at Yi Xian. "I'm a little surprised that you can admit your mistake." As he spoke he paused slightly. "Although you improved because of that time, these things belong to the sect after all. You devoured them without informing us. This kind of behavior is not acceptable." Yi Xian hurriedly said, Yes, I know my mistake. I will definitely not do such a thing in the future." Just as Lin Qiu was about to say something, a voice suddenly rang in his head. "Let him in. In the future he can enter whenever he wants to. Train him with all your might." It was Qin Beihan's voice. Hearing that, Lin Qiu's expression changed. Train him with all my might. He knew very well what this sentence meant. Lin Qiu looked deeply at Yi Xian, then said, "Go in." Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Thank you." As he spoke, he turned to Yu Qi. "Master, I'll go in first." Yu Qi nodded. "Go deeper." Yi Xian nodded, then walked into the sword tomb. Yu Qi glanced at Lin Qiu. "He has already reached the true defense realm. Do you understand?" There was a tinge of pride in his voice. True defense realm. Lin Qiu was stunned. Yu Qi turned and left. True defense realm. Lin Qiu was stunned for a long time where he stood, then he shook his head and smiled. Monster. Such a young true defense realm. In the younger generation of the divine central continent, apart from a few families and Xian men in the upper worlds, basically no one could compare to him. In the sword tomb, Yi Xian kept walking deeper. The size of the sword tomb was slightly beyond Yi Xian's imagination. After walking for around an hour, Yi Xian stopped. He had reached the end. And here he felt a faintly discernible sword essence. At the same time, the Lingxiu sword in his body suddenly trembled, as if it had sensed something. Yi Xian said softly, "This should be the place where the firmament sword master once cultivated." As he spoke, he sat down cross-legged. Gradually, Yi Xian entered a meditative state. At this moment, he could clearly feel the faintly discernible sword essence around him. This sword essence was slightly special, but he couldn't tell what was special about it. Enlightenment. What he needed to do now was to comprehend. Just as Yi Xian was comprehending in the sword tomb, two old men suddenly came to World Shield Mountain. The two old men wore dark golden robes, and there were 12 people behind them. These 12 people all wore golden robes. In the hall, Lord Lu suddenly opened his eyes and said softly, "Yi Xian, you should die. P.S. I want to write a poem." Chapter 321. Early in the morning. A red sun slowly rose on the horizon, awakening all things. On this day, all the Realm Protection Alliance's true defensive realm powerhouses were mobilized. Their target was the Pale Sword Sect. The Level Protection Alliance didn't launch a sneak attack because it was useless at a time like this. After all, the Pale Sword Sect had always been on guard against them. Supremacy Lu didn't want to launch a sneak attack either. He wanted to destroy the Pale Sword Sect openly. As the Realm Protection Alliance's powerhouses moved out, the entire Central Plains was shocked. The great battle was upon them. The Pale Sword Sect. At this moment, the Pale Sword Sect was on full alert, everyone ready for battle. This was a battle of life and death. If they lost, the Pale Sword Sect would be destroyed. When the nest was overturned, how could there be an unbroken egg? As disciples of the Pale Sword Sect, the only choice they had was to fight to the death. The clouds above the Pale Mountains suddenly dispersed, and Supremacy Lu and the others soon appeared in the sky above the Pale Sword Sect. Two old men stood on both sides of Supremacy Lu. Both of them wore dark golden robes and held a walking stick in their hands. Behind them were 12 people, all dressed in golden robes. Their faces were hidden beneath their robes, making it impossible to see their formation. The auras of the two old men and the 12 were as vast as the ocean, unfathomable. Behind them there were still 32 people. These 32 people were all true defensive Dharma realm experts. Supremacy Lu looked down from the clouds, his face expressionless. In truth, compared to the Pale Sword Sect, he hated Yi Xian even more. Could be said that he hated him to the bone. Moreover, Yi Xian's rate of growth made him a little apprehensive. He'd watched Yi Xian grow up, and this speed was even more terrifying than the Pale Sword Sect's most dazzling Sword Xian back in the day. Especially now that Yi Xian was being nurtured by the Pale Sword Sect. Once such a monster received good resources, his progress would be absolutely skyrocketing. In this world, some people were so freakishly unreasonable. Meanwhile, the old man on Exalt Lu's left spoke abruptly. The Firmament Sword Sect should have been annihilated a long time ago. Lord Lu glanced at the old man and said with a smile, "Left Protector is right. It's just that our Realm Defense Alliance has always been planning for the Lord's great matter, so we have not touched the Ashen Sword Sect. But now the Ashen Sword Sect is acting recklessly, daring to protect Yi Xian, who has seized the Origin Heart. But this is good, this time we can wipe them all out." The Left Protector nodded slightly. "However, we still can't be careless. This Blue Sword Sect isn't simple. Don't fail miserably in an easy task." Lord Lu smiled. "Of course. As soon as he finished speaking, he looked down. Meanwhile, a ray of light shot into the sky, and it didn't take long for a middle-aged man to appear before them. The person that had arrived was the sect leader of the Blue Sword sect, Qin Beihan. Qin Beihan glanced at Lord Lu and the others and smiled. Everyone's presence really brings light to my Blue Sword sect. Lu Xun said indifferently, Qin Beihan, I'll give you one last chance. Hand over Yi Xian, otherwise your Blue Sword sect will be annihilated today. Annihilated? Qin Beihan smiled. I still remember that when the ancestor was still alive, your Realm Defense Alliance also said the same thing. And now, the corpse of the Lord who said that is still at the foot of Blue Mountain. Do you want to go take a look? Lu Xun sneered. Unfortunately, your Blue Sword sect doesn't have a second Firmament Sword Master. Qin Beihan nodded. Indeed, the later generations are disappointing. There isn't another person like the ancestor, but you still have some backbone. As he spoke, he looked at Lu Xun and smiled. Let's not waste any more words. Between the two of us, let's decide the winner and loser today. Lu Xun said indifferently, as you wish. Qin Beihan laughed out loud and dashed towards Lord Lu directly. Lu Xun was expressionless. His body trembled and he turned into a streak of light that shot out. Very quickly, a deafening explosion resounded in the sky. In the air, the left protector glanced at Lu Xun and then looked down. Is there anyone else from Blue Sword sect? Below, a sword light suddenly shot into the sky. Very quickly, a middle-aged man appeared in front of the left protector. The middle-aged man wore a black robe and held a giant brush in his hand. This person was Imperial Brush Mountain's Lian Bixian, the third senior brother. Lian Bixian glanced at the left protector. Please enlighten me. The left protector sneered. Wrong. It should be death. As soon as he finished speaking, his right foot stomped on the ground. The space around Lian Bixian shook violently and in the next moment he retreated hundreds of feet. Seeing this scene, the expressions of everyone below instantly turned serious. In the air, Lian Bixian glanced at the left protector. Amazing! As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pointed his brush forward. In an instant, a drop of ink appeared and in the next moment, a jet black sword energy suddenly tore through the sky and arrived before the old man. The old man casually slapped out with his palm. Bang! The old man retreated by over 30 feet. When he stopped, the old man glanced at his palm. There was a drop of ink in his palm. In fact, his palm had been pierced. The old man raised his head and looked at Lian Bixian, who was not far away, and said indifferently, Interesting, continue. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. In the distance, Lian Bixian struck again. Below, the members of Blue Sword sect were slightly worried, because they noticed that Lian Bixian was obviously at a disadvantage. At this moment, another old man from the Realm Guard Alliance who wore a dark golden robe stood out and looked down coldly. Next. This person was the Realm Guard Alliance's Right Reverend. At this moment, Zhang Tai appeared in front of the Right Reverend. He glanced at the Right Reverend and without a word, he directly drew the huge sword on his back and slashed at the Right Reverend. The Right Reverend laughed coldly as he raised his hand and slashed out. Bang! The entire sky trembled violently as Zhang Tai retreated repeatedly. But in the next moment, Zhang Tai charged forward once more. Below, Yu Qi frowned. This was because the strength of these two old men that had just appeared was a little beyond her expectations. Regardless of whether it was Lian Bixian or Zhang Tai, both of them were slightly inferior to these two old men. As time went on, it would be extremely disadvantageous to them. Meanwhile, Xiao suddenly spoke indifferently, Attack. As soon as his voice fell, the 32 true Imperial Dharma Realm powerhouses behind him charged towards the Blue Sword sect below. Group battle. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from within Blue Sword sect. Activate the formation. As this voice fell, the entire Blue Sword sect was suddenly filled with countless spirit swords that soared up into the sky. There were at least 100,000 of them. The expressions of Xiao and the others changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated in succession. In next to no time, numerous explosions resounded incessantly in the sky. In the Grand Hall of Array Dao Peak, Martial Ant Gu sat before a sand table, and the terrain of the entire Blue Sword sect was displayed on the sand table. Moreover, there were tens of thousands of violet source crystals in her room. After a short while she suddenly formed a seal with her hands and shouted, "Change the formation." As soon as she spoke, the countless swords in the sky above Blue Sword Sect suddenly transformed. In next to no time, the swords suddenly condensed into 10 huge swords that were 300 m long. Moreover, every single one of these huge swords was extremely powerful, and the true Imperial Dharma realm experts didn't dare to go head-on against them. Meanwhile, Yu Qi suddenly said, "Attack." As soon as Yu Qi's voice resounded, over 10 rays of sword light shot into the sky from below Blue Sword Sect. Countless experts had gathered outside Blue Sword Sect as well. However, these experts weren't from the Realm Defense Alliance and they were from various forces. It was impossible for the top forces of Blue Firmament World to not pay attention to the battle to the death between Blue Sword Sect and the Realm Defense Alliance. Because this time, it was very likely to change the power structure of Blue Firmament World. In the sky above Blue Sword Sect, the 30+ experts from the Realm Defense Alliance were all entangled by the flying swords. With the addition of Yu Qi and the others at this moment, Blue Sword Sect wasn't at a disadvantage. Of course, this was because of the sword formation. And at this moment, the head of a true Imperial Dharma realm expert from the Realm Defense Alliance suddenly flew out. Noticing this scene, Xiao's expression suddenly changed. It appeared again. That mysterious killer had appeared again. Xiao hurriedly said angrily, "Be careful, there's an assassin in the dark." Before he finished speaking, the head of another true Imperial Dharma realm expert from the Realm Defense Alliance flew out. When this expert's head flew out, his eyes were still wide open. Clearly he had died with a grievance. Xiao hurriedly said, "Return to defend, gather together." Very quickly, the 27 true Imperial Dharma realm experts hurriedly gathered together. They weren't afraid of a head-on confrontation, but this kind of sneaky move, it was impossible to defend against. Yu Qi glanced at his surroundings. Just who was helping him in secret? Without thinking much, she looked at Xiao and the others. "Now attack." The moment her voice landed, she and the experts from Blue Sword Sect behind her directly charged towards Xiao and the others. But at this moment, the 12 experts in golden robes who hadn't attacked before suddenly disappeared on the spot. Boom. Below, the hall of Array Dao Peak suddenly collapsed. Not only did the entire ground collapse, even half of Array Dao Peak collapsed. Following the collapse of Array Dao Peak, the spiritual swords in the sky above Blue Sword Sect disappeared without a trace. And when these 12 people joined the battle, the situation instantly reversed. Blue Sword Sect was directly suppressed. Because the battle strength of these 12 people was actually much stronger than the true Imperial Dharma realm experts. And following the addition of these 12 people, the experts from Blue Sword Sect gradually began to fall. At the same time, among these 12 people, 3 of them directly surrounded Yu Qi. Suppressed. If it was one-on-one, Yu Qi wasn't afraid, but now it was 3 against 1. Yu Qi was clearly helpless. Routed. Along with the addition of these 12 people, Blue Sword Sect started to be routed. Right at this moment, a ray of sword light shot into the sky from below. After it flew into the sky, it trembled violently and transformed into a huge sword net. A sword formation. It was Martial Ant Gu. Even though Array Dao Peak had been destroyed, she wasn't dead. In midair, the huge net of swords appeared out of thin air above the 12 gold figures, and then golden sword energy instantly slashed towards them. Bang! 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 Rumbling resounded incessantly in the sky. However, a short moment later, the sword energy and net in the sky vanished, whereas those 12 people were completely unharmed. The faces of the experts from Blue Sword Sect instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, a figure suddenly flew out from afar. It was Yu Qi. Yu Qi flew over 1 kilometer away, and when she stopped, a wisp of blood instantly seeped out from the corners of her mouth. However, 3 experts in golden robes had appeared in front of her again. Yu Qi's eyes narrowed slightly and she was about to attack again when Yi Xian appeared in front of her. Yu Qi was instantly infuriated when she saw Yi Xian. "Let's go." Chapter 322. Let's go. Yi Xian's heart suddenly felt warm when he saw the furious Yu Qi. It could be said that coming to Pale Sword Sect and getting to know Yu Qi was the most worthwhile thing he'd done. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it, and he suddenly pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. Boom. Two swords suddenly slashed out from the sword chest on his back. In the distance, three experts attacked in unison. Bang! In practically an instant, both of Yi Xian's swords were slashed flying. Yi Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. These people in golden robes were absolutely not experts at the True Defiance realm. Or perhaps they weren't ordinary experts at the True Defiance realm. Yi Xian was about to attack again when Yu Qi suddenly pulled him behind her. In the next moment she pressed her palms together, and a ray of sword light shot out from her palms. In the next moment Yu Qi leaned forward, and then she pressed her palms together and slashed them forward. An illusory and enormous sword slashed out from her palms. In the distance the three of them stopped and then they slapped their right palms forward at the same time. Three golden palm prints tore through the sky and smashed directly onto the enormous sword. Bang! The enormous sword shattered with a bang and the entire sky trembled. In the next moment, the three of them charged directly at Yu Qi. They were extremely swift and their auras were like monstrous waves that were extremely terrifying. Yu Qi's pupils constricted when she saw this scene. She was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly descended to the ground of Pale Sword Sect. Yu Qi heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Yi Xian leave and she was about to attack. But right at this moment, a powerful aura suddenly appeared from below. At this moment, countless people in the sky were stunned. Yu Qi looked down. Yi Xian was standing on the ground and countless strands of the energy of the earth were converging towards him like a tide. The three experts opposite Yu Qi stopped as well, and they looked at Yi Xian with a trace of vigilance in their eyes. In next to no time, a golden sword suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Haoran Gaia carrying the power of the earth. Yi Xian held the Haoran Gaia in his hand. At the same time his sword will surge towards the Haoran Gaia. At this moment, the sword in Yi Xian's hand gave off an aura that far surpassed that of a true Imperial Magic Realm expert. Yi Xian grinned malevolently and raised his head to face the three golden-robed experts. "Come take my sword." As soon as he finished speaking he stomped his right foot. The earth shook violently. Boom! A sword emitting golden sword light soared into the sky, tearing apart the horizon. Everywhere this sword passed, space trembled violently as if it was about to be torn apart, and it was extremely shocking. Yu Qi's beautiful eyes were filled with disbelief when she saw this strike because the might of this strike had greatly exceeded her expectations. On the other hand, the three people opposite Yu Qi also had solemn expressions. None of them were careless, and the three of them suddenly formed a hand seal. In the next moment, three enormous palms that could prop up the heavens suddenly descended from the sky. If these three giant palms were to fall, the entire Azure Sword Peak would probably be razed to the ground in an instant. At this moment Yi Xian's sword arrived. The sound of something tearing resounded abruptly in the sky, and then one of the enormous palms was directly shattered by Yi Xian's sword. However, another enormous palm smashed forcefully onto Yi Xian's sword. Bang! Yi Xian's halcyon armor trembled violently, and then the entire sword became illusory. However, the enormous palm was instantly shattered, and it transformed into a golden wave of air that shook through the sky. Meanwhile, another enormous golden palm smashed onto Yi Xian's halcyon armor. Bang! The ground trembled once more and then it fell swiftly to the ground in front of Yi Xian. At the same time the enormous palm in the sky became slightly illusory, but it didn't shatter. The enormous palm descended straight towards Yi Xian. Below, Yi Xian's expression was extremely solemn as he sensed the earth before him. He'd still underestimated the strength of these 12 people. If he fought them head-on, then unless he utilized the World Pagoda, otherwise he wouldn't have any chance of winning. On the other hand, he didn't have any chance to launch a sneak attack. Because Mo Xiu and the others had banded together, so it was difficult for him to kill them without anyone noticing. As for these 12 people in gold robes, their strengths were above Mo Xiu and the others, so it was even more difficult to assassinate them. Right when Yi Xian was pondering, the enormous palm was already over 100 m above him. Meanwhile, Yu Qi suddenly pressed his fingers together and pointed towards the sky. Boom! A ray of sword light slashed up diagonally, and the enormous palm was instantly shattered. After he slashed the enormous palm into pieces, Yu Qi lowered his head to look at Yi Xian. "Let's go." His tone was indisputable. Yi Xian shook his head. How could he leave at a time like this? Yi Xian grinned. "Master, how about this? You fight two, I'll fight one." Yu Qi was just about to speak when Yi Xian had already charged towards one of the experts. A head-on battle. A true defense law realm expert wasn't a challenge to him now, and he wanted to fight an expert. Live combat was the best at improving a person. Especially battles of life and death. Because battles of life and death were usually able to stimulate a person's potential. When one faced a moment of life and death, anything was possible. Yi Xian held a heaven-rank sword in his hand as he charged directly towards that expert. That expert had a calm expression as he pressed the fingers of his right hand together and pointed forward. Bang! The space where Yi Xian resided instantly warped. Meanwhile, Yi Xian directly utilized the spatial Dao law, and under the influence of the spatial Dao law, the warped space instantly returned to normal. That expert's brows knit together slightly when he saw this scene. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword was already a few inches away from the space between his brows. This sword strike was extremely close to the space between the expert's brows, yet it was unable to pierce through. This little bit of distance seemed so close yet so far away. Meanwhile, that expert suddenly vanished. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly withdrew his sword and slashed diagonally. A fist smashed onto the blade of Yi Xian's sword. Bang! Yi Xian instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. After he stopped, he suddenly leaped up and then two flying swords suddenly slashed out from within his sword chest. The swords were extremely swift and they arrived before that expert in the blink of an eye. But just like before, the swords seemed to have been obstructed by something when they arrived before that expert, and they were unable to advance at all. That expert glanced at Yi Xian and said, "Monstrous indeed. Unfortunately, he's too young." As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and arrived directly in front of Yi Xian. Then a fist smashed onto Yi Xian's stomach. Bang! Yi Xian's figure arched as he was blasted flying, and he flew for over 600 m. Moreover, blood sprayed incessantly from his mouth. The gap. Yi Xian hadn't expected that there would be such a huge gap between him and his opponent even though he had already attained the magical suppression realm. There was a gap. But it didn't mean that he couldn't fight. Yi Xian roared furiously. The next moment, the entire ground trembled violently, and then boundless energy of the earth converged towards him. Moreover, he had condensed a Haoran Gaia in his hand. The expert narrowed his eyes at the sight of this. Yi Xian had used this technique just now and it was extremely powerful. On the other side, Yi Xian held the Haoran Gaia in his hand as he leaped to the expert's head, and then he slashed down. One strike to determine life and death. This strike contained two types of sword will and one strike to determine life and death. This strike could be said to be his strongest strike besides the world prison pagoda. The sword stopped when it was 10 inches away from the expert's head. But in the next moment the space around the expert suddenly trembled, and then something seemed to shatter. In the blink of an eye, the expert was instantly pushed back 300 m. After stopping, the expert touched his forehead. Fresh blood was slowly flowing down his forehead. After a moment of silence, he looked at Yi Xian with a gloomy expression. "No wonder the High Lord said that you must die. You are only at the magical suppression realm, but you can already hurt me. If we let you continue to grow, the Realm Protection Alliance will be in big trouble in the future." In the future? Yi Xian grinned. The Realm Protection Alliance will be in big trouble now. As soon as he finished speaking, he rushed out again. At this moment, the expert suddenly disappeared, and in front of Yi Xian, the space suddenly fluctuated violently like waves. Sensing this, Yi Xian's expression changed and he slashed down with his sword with both hands. The moment the sword fell, the expert just happened to appear in front of Yi Xian, and at the same time he punched out. This punch was like a volcanic eruption and a domineering force poured out from his fist. Boom! The entire sky shook violently and then two figures rapidly retreated. That powerhouse quickly stopped. However, Yi Xian was still retreating violently. This time he had retreated more than 1,000 feet. As soon as he stopped, blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth again. Yi Xian, on the other hand, grinned crazily. Reality proved that he could fight. If he was afraid from the beginning, then he might not know that the gap between him and his opponent was not as big as he thought. It was okay if he could not win, but he must dare to fight. Of course, many times if he could not win, then he should not fight. But at this time there was no other way because the opponent was coming to kill him. If he fought, then he might have a chance to live, but if he did not fight, then he would not have a chance at all. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then he stomped his right foot on the ground and charged at the expert again. At this moment, the expert's expression had turned ferocious. "Since you're courting death, then I'll fulfill your wish." As soon as he spoke, he suddenly spun his hands, and in an instant, two powerful auras swept out from between his hands. At the same time, he suddenly vanished. Boom! In the sky, a figure flew out without any warning. It was Yi Xian. However, in the next moment, Yi Xian charged at the expert again. But in no time he charged out again. In the beginning, Yi Xian was completely suppressed. However, as the battle went on, the expert discovered to his shock that Yi Xian seemed to be growing stronger and stronger. After a quarter of an hour, Yi Xian flew out again. Just as he was about to charge out again, a familiar voice suddenly rang in his ears. "Let me help you." Yi Xian nodded. As soon as he said that, a sword suddenly stabbed into his back. Yi Xian's body stiffened. P.S. I checked last night and found that since the new year, many readers have rewarded and voted. This directly brought me back to 9th place on the monthly votes list. I've seen every single one of the readers' rewards and votes, so I can't write them all here. Sorry. I'm really grateful for everyone's support. Life can be difficult at times, but you must face it with determination. Chapter 323. It was Guxi's voice. He was very familiar with the person who had stabbed his junior with a sword. Because this person was none other than Nangong. Noticing this, Yu Qi's expression changed drastically. Just as he was about to turn back, he was blocked by the three powerhouses. Below them, countless Azure Sword sect disciples were stunned. How could Nangong attack Yi Xian? This was what Yi Xian wanted to know. Behind Yi Xian, Nangong's expression was ferocious. "You seem to be very confused." Yi Xian nodded. Nangong smiled. "Do you know? It wasn't easy to shatter Shang Yu's dantian and greatly reduce his strength. Who would have thought that another person like you would appear? With you around, I will never be able to stand out in the Azure Sword sect. Since that's the case, what's the point of me staying here?" Speaking of this, his expression became even more ferocious. "Don't think that I don't know how biased the sect leader is. You can enter the sword tomb whenever you want, and you even obtained several heaven-grade swords from it, right? Right?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly thrust his sword forward, and the sword directly entered Yi Xian's body. However, that sword was slowly disappearing. Sensing this, Nangong's expression changed drastically. He was about to retreat when Yi Xian suddenly turned around. A sword was pressed against his forehead. Nangong's body stiffened, his eyes filled with disbelief. How can you be fine, you?" Yi Xian smiled. "Do you want to know?" Nangong was about to speak when Yi Xian grinned. "I'm not going to tell you." As soon as he finished speaking, he held his sword and stabbed it forward. The sword pierced through Nangong's forehead, causing blood to flow out. Nangong stared at Yi Xian, his eyes still filled with disbelief. He could not understand how Yi Xian was not only fine after his sword pierced Yi Xian's body, but also swallowed his sword. He couldn't figure it out even when he died. Yi Xian did not care about Nangong. Instead, he turned to face the golden-robed expert. He had always been at a disadvantage in the battle just now. The strength of the other party had completely exceeded his expectations. Although it was very strong, he was excited. Because after so long he had never truly fought with anyone in a true sense. Although he had been suppressed in the battle just now, he had fought to his heart's content. Battle. Yi Xian stomped on the ground with his right foot and dashed out again. Seeing this scene, the eyelids of the strong man not far away twitched. He had already changed from looking down on Yi Xian in the beginning to taking him seriously. Because Yi Xian's battle prowess was really strong. Most importantly, Yi Xian was a little unafraid of death. He was playing with his life. Once he put his life on the line, there would definitely be a boost to his battle prowess. Not to mention Yi Xian, if any ordinary person put their life on the line, they would be feared. In front of Yi Xian, the expert was completely enraged. Experts who could reach this level were definitely not ordinary people. Once they faced Yi Xian directly, Yi Xian's chances of winning would be reduced. Soon the two of them fought again. However, Yi Xian was still suppressed. In addition, because of the addition of these 12 people, the Azure Sword sect was completely suppressed. In the air, the battle between Qin Beihan and revered Lord Lu was still undecided. Therefore, if the battle continued, the Azure Sword sect would definitely not be able to win. Not only that, Zhang Tai and the others were obviously inferior to the left and right guardians of the Realm Defense Alliance. At this moment, the sound of a sword suddenly resounded from the distant sky. Then in the air an expert wearing a golden robe appeared. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. The golden-robed expert's head flew off in an instant. Seeing this scene, the nearby Mo Xiao and the others' expressions changed greatly. Soon, a middle-aged man appeared in the sky above the Azure Sword sect. This person was Xianxia. Yu Qi and the others heaved sighs of relief when they saw Xianxia. There was no doubt that Xianxia was the most capable person in the Azure Sword sect. On the other side, those golden-robed experts looked at Xianxia. Their eyes were filled with seriousness when they looked at Xianxia. Xianxia held his sword and looked coldly at those golden-robed experts. He didn't waste his breath, and in the next moment he slashed forward swiftly with his sword. His sword was extremely fast, so fast that it was impossible to see the trajectory of the sword light. In the distance, the expression of one of the golden-robed experts changed greatly. He overlapped his hands and suddenly pressed forward. At this moment, the space in front of him actually shook like a wave. At this moment, Xianxia's sword arrived. Under everyone's gazes, the sword directly cut open the space in front of them. Bang! The entire space shook violently, and then a powerful force blasted the golden-robed expert away. This flight covered a distance of several thousand feet. However, Xianxia didn't stop. He pointed with his fingers and a strand of sword light suddenly tore through the sky. A few hundred meters away, a law defense realm expert of the Guardian Alliance was instantly pierced between his brows. The expert's eyes were wide open and he died with everlasting regret, because he didn't realize how the sword had pierced through his brows until he died. Xianxia was about to attack when a furious shout suddenly sounded out from nearby. "How dare you!" As the voice fell, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Xianxia. The old man was the left guardian of the Guardian Alliance, and on the other side, Lian Bixin, who was fighting him, had appeared as well. But at this moment, Lian Bixin's face was pale, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. Obviously he was injured. Lian Bixin spoke softly when he saw Xianxia, eldest senior brother. Xianxia nodded slightly. "Go help Zhang Tai." Lian Bixin nodded, and then he transformed into a ray of sword light that charged towards the right guardian of the Guardian Alliance. Xianxia turned to look at the left guardian and sneered, "I thought that the Lord of the Guardian Alliance would come personally, but I didn't expect that he would only send 2 pieces of trash like you." The left guardian narrowed his eyes. "Lord? Xianxia, do you think that someone like you is worthy of the Lord to come personally?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly flew up, and in the next moment he formed seals with his hands, and in an instant numerous black streams of air appeared in the surroundings. The left guardian suddenly roared furiously, "Condense!" As soon as he finished speaking, the black streams of air in the surroundings were about to condense. But right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly slashed forward with his sword, "Break!" As soon as the sword descended, a ray of sword light that was 300 m long suddenly slashed down from the sky like a waterfall. In an instant, the black streams of air in the sky vanished without a trace. The left guardian's expression changed greatly and he hurriedly dodged backwards. With this dodge, he dodged a few hundred meters and completely pulled away from Xianxia. Xianxia glanced coldly at him. "Come, I'll give you another chance to use it. Don't say that my Azure Sword sect is bullying you." The left guardian's expression was extremely unsightly. "Xianxia, you'll pay the price for your arrogance." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly tapped his chest. In an instant, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body, and along with the appearance of this aura, the entire space in the sky suddenly surged like a wave of water. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Come. In the distance, Xianxia was expressionless as he held the sword in his right hand behind his shoulder. After a moment of silence, the left guardian suddenly charged into the sky, and in the next moment he slapped his palm down towards Xianxia. His palm struck out. A palm print suddenly pierced through the layers of space and approached Xianxia. This palm print directly pierced through space, so it was so fast that besides Xianxia no one could see it clearly. At this moment Xianxia attacked. A sword stabbed forward. It was a very simple sword strike. As soon as his sword stabbed forward, the space at the tip of Yi Xian's sword suddenly split open, and a pitch-black rift appeared there. In next to no time, a world-shaking explosion resounded. Rumble. The entire sky trembled violently, and the left protector was forced to retreat continuously. This time he retreated several hundred meters. As soon as he stopped moving, Xianxia suddenly appeared in front of him, and then a sword stabbed straight towards the center of his forehead. It was like a bolt of lightning and it was extremely swift. The left guardian's pupils constricted while he was shocked in his heart. At this moment he was utterly unable to dodge and he could only take this attack head-on. In next to no time he suddenly roared furiously, and then he smashed his fist forward. Bang! As the punch landed, an explosion resounded in the sky like a clap of thunder. Xianxia's sword shattered into pieces, whereas the left guardian was 300 m away. At the same time his entire right arm had been chopped off. Blood flowed incessantly from his left shoulder. The left guardian stared fixedly at Xianxia while he felt extremely fearful in his heart. He hadn't expected that Xianxia would actually be so formidable, and it was to the point that Xianxia could be said to have exceeded the scope of the Azure world. Xianxia didn't attack the left guardian again and he turned around and slashed down instead. The head of a true defense low realm expert from the Guardian Alliance that was over 100 m away instantly flew into the air. At the same time, the head of another true defense low realm expert that was over 100 m away flew into the air as well. Instant death. It was an instant death. The expressions of the experts from the Guardian Alliance changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated successively and didn't dare attack again. On the other hand, the left guardian had a solemn expression on his face as well. If he didn't deal with Xianxia, then not only would the Azure Sword sect be unable to be annihilated today, all of them would probably perish here. When he thought up to here, he hesitated for a moment before he withdrew a transmission talisman and crushed it. Call for reinforcements? Xianxia spoke indifferently from not too far away. Let me see how many more experts your Guardian Alliance has. But I'll deal with all of you first before that. As soon as he finished speaking, he was just about to attack again. Right at this moment, the left guardian suddenly sneered, Xianxia, someone can deal with you. As soon as he finished speaking, two formidable auras suddenly appeared in the sky above the Azure Sword sect. Xianxia frowned when he sensed this scene and then he raised his head. The space in the sky suddenly split open, and then a middle-aged man and an old man walked out from within. They were Lin Songyun and the Left Guardian Alliance from the Spirit Void Star Palace. The Left Guardian flew over to them and pointed at Xianxia. Both of you, this person's strength is extraordinary, so I'll have to trouble the both of you. Lin Songyun glanced at Xianxia with a trace of surprise in his eyes. I never expected that such an expert would actually exist here. The Left Guardian's expression changed. Meanwhile, Lin Songyun added, we can deal with him for you, but that's just a matter of searching for someone. The Left Guardian hurriedly said, leave it to the Guardian Alliance. Lin Songyun nodded slightly and then he glanced at the surroundings. In the next moment he seemed to have been petrified. End of this chapter. Chapter 324. Lin Songyun's eyes opened wide while he was stunned on the spot, and he was staring fixedly at a single person. It was Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Beside Lin Songyun, Qin Zhen was also stunned when he saw Yi Xian. In the next moment, Lin Songyun appeared in front of Yi Xian. Xianxia frowned slightly when he saw this and he was about to attack. However, Lin Songyun suddenly waved his right hand and blasted the gold-robed expert who was about to attack Yi Xian flying. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. What the hell is going on? On the other hand, the left protector's brows were knit together tightly. As if he'd thought of something, he suddenly withdrew a drawing, and it was the one Lin Songyun had given him. The person in the drawing was Yi Xian. The left protector's face instantly turned gloomy, and his gaze flickered as he glanced at Yi Xian. No one knew what he was thinking. Lin Songyun gazed at Yi Xian with an extremely amiable expression. May I ask if you know a woman in a plain dress? A plain dress. Yi Xian was stunned and then he became slightly vigilant. At this moment he was extremely shocked. Who is this person? Why does he know a woman in a plain dress? Lin Songyun grinned when he noticed Yi Xian's vigilance. Don't worry, we have no ill intent. She asked us to come look for you. Look for me? Yi Xian was stunned and then he hurriedly said, Where is she now? Lin Songyun and Qin Zhen exchanged glances, and there was slight excitement in their eyes. Because Yi Xian's words represented that he knew the woman in a plain dress. Lin Songyun gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. She's at Spirit Void Star Palace right now. Can you go look for her with us right now? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he shook his head. What? Lin Songyun hurriedly asked. Is there a problem? Yi Xian nodded. I can't leave yet. As he spoke, he faced Imo Xiao and the others from the Realm Protection Alliance. The Realm Protection Alliance will not let me leave. Lin Songyun glanced at the left protector and the others, and then he said indifferently, Don't worry, they won't dare to touch you with the two of us here. His voice was very loud and everyone in the surroundings heard him clearly. Obviously this was purposely said for the Realm Defense Alliance to hear. Not far away, the left protector looked at Lin Songyun. Sir, this Yi Xian is someone that my Realm Protection Alliance must kill. Someone I must kill? Lin Songyun's eyes narrowed. You said that he is someone that your Realm Defense Alliance must kill. The left protector nodded. Yes. Lin Songyun coldly laughed. Ignorant. Let me give you a word of advice. Your Realm Defense Alliance better not touch this person, otherwise. Otherwise what? Just then a voice rang through the air. Then Supreme Lord Lu appeared not too far away from Lin Songyun. At the same time, Qin Beihan appeared over 100 feet away from Yi Xian. Obviously the two of them were evenly matched in strength. It was impossible to determine life and death in a short period of time. Supreme Lord Lu stared fixedly at Lin Songyun. My Realm Protection Alliance must kill this person. No one can protect him. How dare you? Lin Songyun frowned. Your tiny Realm Protection Alliance really doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. Let me tell you, if you dare touch this person in the slightest, then my Void Spirit Star Palace will annihilate your Realm Protection Alliance. Void Spirit Star Palace? Supreme Lord Lu frowned. He turned to look at the left protector. The left protector shook her head. It isn't a force from our star region. I don't know what force it is. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Supreme Lord Lu looked at Lin Songyun. Sir, my Realm Protection Alliance has no enmity with your Void Spirit Star Palace, nor do we wish to become enemies with you. But my Realm Protection Alliance must kill this Yi Xian. I hope that you will not stop us. Lin Songyun looked straight at Supreme Lord Lu. I said that no one can touch this person. Supreme Lord Lu's expression instantly turned gloomy when he heard this. At the side, Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then he said, That's Senior. She asked you to come find me? Lin Songyun smiled. Yes, she is at Void Spirit Star Palace at this moment. It will only take a month from here. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then he said, Then can you notify her now? Lin Songyun shook his head. To cross star regions. The two of us don't have the ability to do that. So the two of us hope that you will return to Void Spirit Star Palace with us. She's waiting for you right now. Obviously he hoped that Yi Xian would return to Void Spirit Star Palace with him right now. After all, he wanted to report back as soon as possible. Otherwise, once that mysterious woman flared up, then Void Spirit Star Palace would probably suffer a calamity. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Senior, firstly, I really can't leave right now. Secondly, the Realm Defense Alliance won't let me leave as well. Even though he could leave with the two of them, the Pale Sword Sect was in danger, so how could he leave just like that? Lin Songyun thought for a moment and then he said, Then when can you leave? Yi Xian pointed at Supreme Lord Lu and the others in the distance. We'll have to wait to ask them. Lin Songyun turned around to gaze at Supreme Lord Lu. Is your Realm Defense Alliance really going to act against him? Supreme Lord Lu spoke indifferently. He must die. Lin Songyun gazed at Supreme Lord Lu for a short moment, and then he nodded. It looks to me like you want to die. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward, and a powerful aura suddenly enveloped Supreme Lord Lu. In the next moment, a powerful force rained down from above Supreme Lord Lu's head. Supreme Lord Lu's expression changed drastically. Obviously, he hadn't expected Lin Songyun to suddenly attack. Not to mention him, no one here had expected Lin Songyun to actually attack. The powerful force above Supreme Lord Lu's head was like a mountain that pressed down upon him. He didn't dare act carelessly, and he clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it upwards. Bang! With Supreme Lord Lu at the center, the space in an area of over 1 kilometer shook violently, and then a world-shaking explosion resounded from above Supreme Lord Lu. Meanwhile, Lin Songyun suddenly vanished. A moment later, Supreme Lord Lu's pupils constricted, and then he smashed his fist forward. Bang! In front of everyone's eyes, Lord Lu retreated 1,000 feet. He just stopped when a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Supreme Lord Lu wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and then he looked up at Lin Songyun. Are you really going to become enemies with my Realm Defense Alliance for the sake of Xian? Become enemies? Lin Songyun laughed coldly. To be honest, a third-rate power like your Realm Defense Alliance isn't qualified to become enemies with my Spirit Void Star Palace. The expressions of Supreme Lord Lu and the experts of the Realm Defense Alliance instantly became slightly ferocious. No one had ever humiliated the Realm Defense Alliance like this. Supreme Lord Lu laughed savagely. How arrogant of you. Aren't you afraid of cutting your tongue? As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pressed his palms together, and then he swiftly moved forward. Destroy. As soon as he finished speaking, the space in front of him suddenly split apart, and then a palm shot out explosively from within the spatial rift and shot straight at Lin Songyun. Lin Songyun's face remained emotionless. The ignorant are fearless. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and smashed his fist forward. A ray of light that was shaped like an umbrella swept out from within his fist. If this chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Come. Bang. As soon as they collided, the entire sky trembled violently, and then they exploded apart. They transformed into a powerful wave of energy that surged incessantly towards the surroundings, and in an instant the entire sky trembled. On the other hand, Supreme Lord Lu retreated repeatedly, and he'd left the territory of the Firmament Sword Sect. How strong! Xian's heart shook. Lin Songyun's strength is much stronger than I imagined. It might be on par with Xian. However, he didn't dare be certain, because he felt that no matter if it was Lin Songyun or Xian, both of them were definitely concealing their strength and hadn't displayed their full strength. In the air, Lin Songyun glanced coldly at the nearby Supreme Lord Lu. My Void Spirit Star Palace will not allow anyone to harm this person. If your Realm Defense Alliance wants his life, then my Void Spirit Star Palace will destroy you. What a joke. The nearby left protector suddenly said fiercely, Destroy my Realm Defense Alliance? I don't know what kind of power your Void Spirit Star Palace is, but aren't you afraid of biting your own tongue when you say you want to destroy us? Lin Songyun was about to say something when Xianxia shook his head. There's no need to say anything more. People like them have never left this region of the stars, nor have they seen the vast space outside. No matter how much you tell them, they won't have the slightest idea. As he spoke, he looked at the nearby left protector. Then let's directly attack. Directly attack. Below, countless Blue Sword Sect's disciples were somewhat dumbstruck, including Yu Qi and the rest. Where on earth were these two from? Why were they so protective of Xian? At this moment, Lin Songyun and Xianxia were definitely protecting Xian. They hadn't expected to find Xian here. Since they had found him, this meant that Void Spirit Star Palace's crisis had been resolved. One had to know that the woman had already lost her patience. If there was still no news of Xian, there was no guarantee that Void Spirit Star Palace wouldn't be split apart by her sword. Right now, they only wanted to bring Xian back as soon as possible. In the distance, the left protector looked at Lin Songyun and Xianxia for a long time. A moment later, he said in a low voice, You two, just who is this Xian? Why are you protecting him? Lin Songyun said indifferently, Someone you can't afford to offend. Can't afford to offend? In the distance, Xian stilled. Can't afford to offend me? Very quickly he began to understand. It was probably because of the plainly dressed woman. In reality, at this moment he was also somewhat puzzled. The plainly dressed woman had asked him to go look for her, but he couldn't figure out why she'd asked him to go look for her. So mysterious. Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about it. At any rate, the mysterious woman wouldn't harm him. The left protector glanced at Xian and then he said fiercely, I don't care who he is. He must die. As he spoke, he gazed at Exalt Lu. Both of them nodded slightly and then Exalt Lu opened his palm. A strand of white light suddenly floated out. In next to no time, a figure gradually condensed within the white light. At the same time, a wave of pressure suddenly appeared here. Bang! Countless mountains had actually started to crack and collapse. At this moment, the expressions of everyone here instantly became solemn. Lin Songyun gazed at the figure and then he suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. "Let's go." Yi Xian was stunned. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly said, "Listen to him." P.S. Some readers have told me that there are pirated versions in some places. Moreover, the author's name has been changed and they're even collecting money. Actually, I have no choice. If I sue them, I might sue myself into poverty. Just support the original version. End of this chapter. Chapter 325. Yi Xian looked at the figure in the sky, his heart shaking. Just what kind of expert could make Lin Songyun and Xianxia so afraid? In the sky, the figure gradually condensed. Very quickly, a white-haired middle-aged man appeared in the sky. The white-haired man's eyes were a bit dazed, but they quickly cleared. Very quickly he looked down below, his eyes filled with disdain. Disdain. This was a kind of disdain from above, like a human looking at an ant. This kind of feeling was very uncomfortable. Beside Yi Xian, Lin Songyun said in a low voice, "Doppelganger." Qingjin nodded, "Very strong." Lin Songyun said softly, "Looks like this is their head." Qingjin looked at him, "Very strong. What do you plan to do?" Lin Songyun said in a low voice, "Report." Qingjin shook his head, "No, too slow. A round trip would take at least 1.5 months. Lin Songyun looked at the distant Yi Xian, "Take him away." "Take him away." Qingjin said, "You take him away." Lin Songyun wanted to say something, but at this time the white-haired man in the sky suddenly said, "Leave? Don't even think about leaving." Lin Songyun looked at the white-haired man. The white-haired man looked down at him. "From Spirit Void Star Palace?" Lin Songyun said lightly, "You probably haven't heard of it." The white-haired man said lightly, "I've heard a bit." Lin Songyun smiled, "You will regret this." The white-haired man was expressionless. Regret? Perhaps. But that is a matter for the future. Right now I will give you two a chance. Scram immediately and I will spare your lives. Scram? Lin Songyun smiled. He looked at the nearby Yi Xian. "I just said he will be protected by my Spirit Void Star Palace." The white-haired man shook his head. "Since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish." As his voice fell, his right hand flipped downwards and pressed down lightly. An invisible pressure appeared above everyone's heads. This pressure slowly descended. In an instant the entire space above Pale Sword Sect became illusory. At the sight of that, Yi Xian's face instantly turned serious. So powerful. If this pressure were to descend, the entire Pale Sword Sect would turn into ashes. Lin Songyun was about to act when Xianxia, who was nearby, suddenly floated up. In the next moment, a powerful sword intent suddenly swept out from his body, and the sword intent transformed into an illusory sword that met the powerful pressure in the sky. Seeing this, there was a hint of surprise in Lin Songyun's eyes. A peak great sword immortal. If he advanced another half a step, as he spoke he exchanged a look with Qingjin. There was a trace of shock in their eyes. Because if Xianxia advanced a step further, then it would be incredible. In the air, the sword condensed from sword will soared into the sky. When it encountered that formless pressure, the sword suddenly cracked. At this moment, Xianxia lightly stomped his right foot and pointed towards the sky. Break. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword trembled violently, and then a ray of dazzling light suddenly erupted from it. Bang! A deafening explosion suddenly resounded through the sky, and then countless rays of light shot towards the surroundings. At the same time, the entire sky became illusory as if it was about to shatter. It was extremely shocking. In midair, Xianxia looked up at the white-haired middle-aged man with an expressionless face, and there was a ray of light flickering on the tip of his finger. The white-haired man glanced at Xianxia and spoke indifferently, "Since the Firmament Sword Master, you can be considered to be a pretty good swordsman in the firmament world. Unfortunately, the swordsman Dao is merely a Xiao Dao in my eyes." Xiao Dao. Lin Songyun suddenly smiled. "You think the swordsman Dao is a Xiao Dao?" The white-haired man looked at Lin Songyun and replied with a question. "You think it's very strong?" Lin Songyun shook his head and smiled. In the past he did not think that the swordsman Dao was very strong because the swordsman Dao that he had met were very, very few. It should be known that the swordsman Dao was harder to cultivate the higher one went, so there were very very few truly strong swordsman Dao in the world. However, that was until he met the woman in the plain dress. Swordsman not strong? That's because you haven't met a strong one. The true peerless swordsman Dao was so strong that it made people feel despair. The white-haired man suddenly said, "Actually, I'm also very curious, what exactly is it that makes you all want to protect?" As he said this, he pointed at Zhou Xian who was not far away. "Protect him." Lin Songyun smiled. "Is there any point in saying all this now?" The white-haired man said indifferently, "There is indeed no point. If that's the case, then all of you can be buried with him." As soon as he finished speaking, he flipped his right hand up again. The next moment, a giant illusory palm suddenly appeared in the sky above the firmament sword sect. This palm was hundreds of feet long, blocking out the sky and the sun. As this palm appeared, an aura that could destroy heaven and earth came crashing down from the sky. Under this aura, the countless firmament sword sect disciples below suddenly found it hard to breathe. A powerhouse that could destroy heaven and earth. Zhou Xian's right hand clenched tightly. At this moment he felt a sense of helplessness. A deep sense of helplessness. Because in front of such a powerhouse, there was nothing he could do. He knew that even if he took out the prison pagoda, it would be useless. It wasn't that the prison pagoda was useless, it was that he was currently too weak. Other than that, he didn't dare to use the prison pagoda anymore. If this thing was used again, it might create someone even more terrifying than this white-haired man. Instinct told him that the existence inside the pagoda was the real terror. Otherwise, the mysterious woman wouldn't have sacrificed a part of her clone to suppress the existence inside the pagoda. In the sky, Xianxia suddenly opened his palm. The next moment, a ray of sword light appeared in his palm. In the blink of an eye, his entire body turned into a ray of sword light that shot into the sky. The spectators watched as a ray of sword light tore through the sky and intended to pierce through the sky. The sword in midair stabbed directly against the enormous palm. Bang! The enormous palm shook violently. At the same time, countless cracks that seemed like a spiderweb had appeared on it. However, Xianxian's attack had been blasted apart. The enormous palm descended forcefully. On the other hand, Xianxian was actually pressed down by the pressure of the enormous palm, and even his sword intent was crushed into pieces. The countenances of the countless firmament sword sect disciples instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Lin Songyun suddenly soared into the sky. In the next moment he waved his right hand and a palm-sized black seal shot into the sky. The black seal expanded explosively in midair, and then a strand of powerful force instantly surged out from within it. Rumble. The enormous palm shook violently while more cracks appeared on it. However, Lin Songyun's black seal had been blasted apart, and it transformed into countless pieces that rained down from the sky. Lin Songyun slowly clenched his right fist and then his figure shot into the sky. A furious shout resounded in midair, and then a fist collided with the enormous palm. Bang! The fist was instantly blasted apart and Lin Songyun fell from midair. He couldn't defeat it. At this moment the enormous palm had arrived above them. If it were to descend, then the entire firmament sword sect would be transformed into ash. It wouldn't just be the entire firmament sword sect, everyone within it would perish. Meanwhile, Xianxian suddenly closed his eyes. In the next moment an illusory sword suddenly appeared above him. At the same time, a thunderous sword howl resounded through the heavens and the earth. A moment of silence ensued and then Xianxian suddenly opened his eyes. In the next moment his figure vanished into thin air. At the same time, a ray of light suddenly stabbed against the enormous palm. Bang! The enormous palm was blasted apart. On the other hand, the white-haired man suddenly vanished on the spot and then... Bang! Xianxian, who was not far away, was sent flying. This time he was sent flying thousands of feet away. When he stopped, there was a sunken palm print on his chest. The white-haired man glanced at Xianxian and spoke indifferently. "If you were given another 10 years to break through into the sword immortal realm, then my clone would really be helpless against you. Unfortunately, you're still too weak right now." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished, and he was so swift that practically no one was able to see him clearly. In the distance. Bang! Xianxian was blasted flying again, and this time his body actually split apart. If he were to receive another palm strike, then his body would shatter into pieces. The white-haired man didn't hold back at all, and he immediately vanished once more. Meanwhile, Qin Beihan suddenly vanished, and he was already in front of Zhou Xian when he appeared once more. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly slashed his sword forward. Bang! The sword instantly shattered into pieces. At the same time, Qin Beihan's figure was blasted over 1 kilometer away. Zhou Xian was stunned when he witnessed this scene. In the next moment he suddenly gazed at the white-haired man, and then he stomped his right foot against the air. After that, a ray of light slashed forward. The ray of light was extremely swift, and it instantly arrived before the white-haired man. The white-haired man's face remained emotionless as he raised his hand and smashed his fist forward. Rumble! The ray of light instantly shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, a sword had arrived before the center of his forehead, and it was only a few inches away from his forehead. However, it wasn't able to move forward by even an inch, because the white-haired man had clamped down on the sword with 2 fingers. The white-haired man exerted a little force with his fingers, and then a crack resounded as the sword shattered into pieces while Zhou Xian was blasted flying once more. He was invincible. At this moment, countless disciples of the Pale Sword sect felt despair. Right at this moment, a furious shout resounded from below. Activate the formation. It was Martial Aunt Gu's voice. As soon as her voice resounded, the ground throughout the Pale Sword sect suddenly trembled, and it didn't take long for an ethereal platform to suddenly appear in the sky above the Pale Sword sect. Moreover, Lian Bixian, Yu Qi, Martial Aunt Gu, Zhan Tai, Qin Beihan, and Song Xian had all appeared on the platform. In the next moment, all of them suddenly stabbed their swords into the platform, and then a ray of light suddenly shot into the sky. It tore through the clouds and shot into the starry sky. A sword formation. In midair, the white-haired man glanced at the platform and spoke softly. This is probably the immortal annihilation sword formation left behind by the firmament sword master. It's really extraordinary. Come, let me see it. As soon as he finished speaking, his right hand pressed down slightly. In an instant, an invisible pressure crushed down from the center of his palm. Chapter 326. On the round stage, the 6 of them held their swords close to their eyebrows. Sword intent flowed out from their bodies, and on the ground of the round stage, countless sword lights gathered. Immortal Slaying Sword Array. This was the array that the Firmament Sword Master left for the Firmament Sword sect to protect themselves. It was also the strongest trump card of the Firmament Sword sect. Originally they didn't want to use it, but this white-haired man's strength was too strong. If they didn't use it now, they might not have the chance to use it again. In the air, the white-haired man had his right hand behind his back. He was expressionless, and in his palm, a wave of energy was gathering. On the other side, Supreme Lu and the others had already retreated to the side. Actually, they didn't want to summon this white-haired man, because this was what they prepared to deal with the mysterious woman. Unfortunately, Lin Songyun and Qin Wentin were protecting Yi Xian, so they had no choice but to use this trump card. It could be said that both sides had already used their trump cards. At this moment, although this white-haired man seemed to have crushed the Firmament Sword sect, Supreme Lu still felt uneasy, because the mysterious woman still hadn't appeared. The feeling that woman gave him was too terrifying. But now that woman still hadn't appeared. This was what he was most uneasy about. Not far away, Lin Songyun and Qin Zhen's expressions were ugly. Obviously, the 2 of them didn't expect this white-haired man's strength to be so terrifying. After a moment of silence, Lin Songyun said solemnly, "The Realm Defense Alliance is determined to kill him. We must inform the higher-ups, otherwise that kid will die in this world." Qin Zhen said solemnly, "You go back." Lin Songyun shook his head. "You go back, I will stay here to protect him." Qin Zhen wanted to say something, but Lin Songyun shook his head. "Don't waste time. Quickly go." Qin Zhen looked at Lin Songyun. "Be careful. I will return as soon as possible." Finishing, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. 1 month. Lin Songyun looked at the horizon with a hint of worry in his eyes. From Spirit Void Star Palace to here, they used a month's time. And if Qin Zhen went back and brought more people here, that meant it would take at least 2 months. 2 months' time. Lin Songyun glanced at the white-haired man in the sky. This white-haired man was only a clone. If the main body appeared here, there was no way they could fight against him. Lin Songyun shook his head and sighed. No matter what, he could only try his best. Below, on the round platform, 6 illusory swords of light had condensed above the heads of the 6 people. On the round platform, the 6 people's sword intents had also condensed into one. The 6 sword intents merged together. After a moment of silence, Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, "Attack!" As soon as they finished speaking, the 6 of them pointed their fingers toward the sky. So. The 6 illusory swords above the heads of the 6 people suddenly transformed into a sword light and shot into the sky, slashing straight at the white-haired man. Wherever the 6 sword lights passed, the space was directly torn apart. In the air, the white-haired man was expressionless. He suddenly loosened his right hand and in the next moment he slammed it down. Rumble. The entire sky shook violently and countless people instantly felt dizzy. In midair, a formidable force directly pressed down upon the 6 sword lights, and in next to no time numerous terrifying waves of air ceaselessly shook out towards the surroundings. Below them, countless buildings in the Blue Sword sect started to collapse inch by inch. And it wasn't just that, even the ground started to crack open at this moment. Just at this moment, the 6 sword lights in the sky suddenly collapsed and transformed into sword chi that shot out in all directions. Defeated. In the distance, Zhou Xian slowly clenched his right hand. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "Leave immediately. Run as far as you can." It was Yu Qi's voice. Zhou Xian raised his head and looked at the round platform nearby. At this moment, Yu Qi's face was pale and blood flowed endlessly from the corner of his mouth. Zhou Xian shook his head. How could he leave at a time like this? Moreover, he couldn't leave, because the white-haired man definitely wouldn't let him go. The white-haired man wanted to destroy the Pale Sword sect and he wanted to kill him as well. In the air, the white-haired man glanced at Qin Beihan and the others. The immortal slaying sword formation. Not bad. If I'm not wrong, the sword intent left behind by your Pale Sword sect's founding ancestor is below the round platform. Unfortunately, you can't draw it out, right? On the round platform, Qin Beihan looked at the white-haired man. If you have the founding ancestor's sword, you can draw out his sword intent and this clone of yours will be destroyed instantly. The white-haired man smiled. Unfortunately, you don't have it. In the distance, Zhou Xian was stunned and then he hurriedly flew to the round platform. I have it. Yu Qi appeared in front of him and said angrily, "I told you to leave, so leave." Qin Beihan nodded slightly. "We'll do our best to hold him back later. At that time, find an opportunity to escape. If you're not strong enough in the future, don't show yourself." At this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly took out a sword. The exquisite sword. To be more precise, it was the Firmament Thunder Sword, the sword of the founding ancestor of the Pale Sword sect. Everyone on the round platform was stunned when they saw this sword. Obviously, they recognized this sword. "Why are you?" At the side, Zhang Tai looked at Zhou Xian in disbelief. "Why do you have the founding ancestor's sword?" Qin Beihan and the others were also shocked. They didn't expect Zhou Xian to have the Firmament Sword Master's sword. Zhou Xian smiled awkwardly. "It's a long story." Qin Beihan nodded slightly. "Let's not talk about this first." Saying that, he looked at Zhou Xian. "You use this sword and draw out all the sword intent in this sword formation." Saying that, he looked at Yu Qi and the others. "Begin." The 6 of them returned to their positions and Zhou Xian stood in the middle. Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, "Begin." Boom. An illusory huge sword instantly condensed above the heads of the 6 of them. At the same time, the sword intent of the 6 of them appeared on the round platform, and the exquisite sword in Zhou Xian's hand started to tremble violently. Not only the sword in his hand, but the entire round platform also started to tremble crazily as if something was about to come out. In the air, the white-haired man frowned slightly. He clenched his right hand slowly and a wave of energy silently condensed in his palm. At this moment, Qin Beihan suddenly shouted angrily, "Gather." As soon as he shouted, the 6 swords condensed above the heads of the 6 of them. At this moment, a powerful sword intent gathered towards Zhou Xian like a flood. The sword intent didn't enter his body, but gathered into the exquisite sword in his hand. Buzz. The sound of a sword suddenly resounded through the sky. Zhou Xian's entire body was trembling. At this moment he felt that the sword in his hand contained boundless power. At this moment he had a kind of confidence, a confidence that he could split the heavens with one sword. At the side, Qin Beihan suddenly looked at him and shouted angrily, "Attack!" Yi Xian stabbed towards the sky, and the sword in his hand transformed into a sword light that shot into the sky. At this moment, the exquisite sword had far surpassed the heaven grade under the enhancement of the sword intent of the firmament world sword master. This sword pierced through the sky. Seeing how terrifying this sword was, the expressions of Lord Lu and the others instantly turned solemn. In the air, the white-haired man squinted his eyes and suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, an afterimage descended from the sky, and when he arrived in front of the sword, he slapped down with his palm. The moment the palm and the sword came into contact, the heavens and earth shook violently. Rumble. Below, the round platform suddenly collapsed and countless sword lights shot out in all directions. At the same time, the entire Ashenward Peak started to collapse and the surroundings were in a mess. Everyone raised their heads to look at the white-haired man in the air. At this moment, the white-haired man stood silently in the air. He was expressionless as if nothing had happened. However, a trace of uneasiness arose in the hearts of Lord Lu and the others. In the air, the white-haired man looked down at Yi Xian. "Why do you have his sword?" On the round platform, Yi Xian grinned. "Take a guess." The white-haired man stared at Yi Xian. "Don't worry, you'll die for sure." As soon as he finished speaking, his body gradually became illusory. At the sight of this, everyone from the Pale Sword sect heaved a sigh of relief. As for the Realm Defense Alliance, their expressions sank. That sword strike had actually destroyed this clone. Just as the clone was about to completely dissipate, the white-haired man suddenly spoke. "Yi Xian, just you wait." As soon as he finished speaking, he completely disappeared in the air. On the other side, Lord Lu and the others quietly retreated. Qin Beihan and the others didn't stop them because they couldn't stop the other party now unless they wanted to fight to the death. After the Realm Defense Alliance and the others retreated, the surrounding experts also retreated. The Pale Sword sect had won. Very quickly, this news swept through the entire Divine Central Continent like a plague. All the powers were shocked. Obviously, they hadn't expected that the Pale Sword sect would win. After all, the Realm Defense Alliance was still the #1 power in the firmament world. Moreover, they'd mobilized so many experts this time. However, the Pale Sword sect had won. It was extremely dramatic. On the other hand, the expressions of everyone within the Pale Sword sect were solemn. Because they knew that this victory was only temporary. Because the Realm Defense Alliance would definitely make a comeback. At that time, it might not be a clone, but the white-haired man's main body. A clone was already so terrifying, so if the main body descended, would the Pale Sword sect be able to resist it? Within Cloudsword Hall. All the important figures of the Pale Sword sect were within the hall, and Xianxia was there as well. All of them were looking at Yi Xian. They were all waiting for Yi Xian's answer. Because Yi Xian possessed the Firmament Sword Master's sword, and they were extremely curious about this matter. Within the hall, Yi Xian fell silent for a long time before he said, "I just obtained the founding ancestor's sword by chance." He didn't continue when he spoke up to here. Qin Beihan glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "Since you don't want to say more, then we won't force you. However, the founding ancestor's sword in your hands might be the will of the heavens. From this moment onwards, you're the next sect master of my Pale Sword sect." Yi Xian suddenly shook his head. "Sect master, I'm not interested in the position of sect master." Qin Beihan smiled. "If you become the sect master, then you can obtain anything in the sect at any time." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Then I'll consider it." Everyone was speechless. P.S. Happy Lantern Festival. Aren't you curious about what's in the box that Xiao Linger obtained? Let me see if there's a god. Chapter 327. Everyone in the hall shook their heads and smiled when they heard Yi Xian's words. Soon everyone left. Only Xian and Qin Beihan were left in the hall. Qin Beihan looked at Xian and smiled. "Eldest senior brother, I didn't expect that you would break through to the Great Sword Immortal level after leaving the sect for so many years." Xian shook his head. "Half a step and you will be stuck there forever." Qin Beihan nodded. "The higher you go, the harder it is." Then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "What about that young man?" Xian was silent for a moment and then said, His character is not suitable to be the sect leader. Qin Beihan shook his head. This time, I have the opposite opinion from senior brother. Zhou Xian looked at Qin Beihan and the latter smiled. I have already investigated. This person is the Dean of Blue Waves Academy in Qingzhou, and that academy is well managed by him. Although this person's character is a little extreme and irritable, that's only towards enemies. He's still very loyal to his own people. Then he paused and said, as for his extreme character, as long as he is strong enough, these problems are not a problem. Zhou Xian looked at Qin Beihan. His character is similar to mine. Aren't you afraid? Qin Beihan shook his head. Previously I also thought that his character is similar to yours. But in the end I found that in fact they are very different. First, he is not inflexible. He knows how to adapt to changing circumstances. Sometimes not only is he shameless but he also plays dirty. In other words, he is very black-bellied. Then he looked at Zhou Xian. We need someone who can control both the inside and the outside world. Hearing this, Zhou Xian was silent. In any sect or force, the leader must be able to control the people below. And now besides Yi Xian there is only Xiangyu and Xiangyu in Blue Sword sect. Xiangyu can control both the inside and the outside world. And Yi Xian can not only control both the inside and the outside world. At this time Qin Beihan suddenly smiled. Actually, there's one more thing. He doesn't care about the position of sect leader. Then he shook his head and smiled. If this person doesn't die young, his future will not be in Blue Sword sect. Zhou Xian was silent for a moment and then stood up. You decide. With that he turned around and left the hall. Inside the hall, Qin Beihan sighed softly. No one knew what he was thinking. Cloud Sword Hall. After Yi Xian returned to the Cloudy Sword Hall, Lin Songyun followed. Only Yi Xian and Lin Songyun were in the hall, while Yu Qi was in the inner hall. In front of Yi Xian, Lin Songyun said in a low voice, Are you really not coming with me? Once the crisis was over, he hoped to bring Yi Xian away from the Azure Firmament world. If Yi Xian was willing to leave, he was confident that he could bring Yi Xian back to the Spirit Void Star Palace. It was extremely difficult to chase after someone in the vast starry sky. Yi Xian shook his head. Senior, I also want to see her, but I really can't leave now. Right now, the crisis of the Pale Sword sect had yet to be resolved. Moreover, he still had many things to do. Lin Songyun sighed in a low voice. If you stay here, I do not dare to guarantee your safety. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, Is she all right? Lin Songyun smiled bitterly. Of course she's fine. It's just that her temper, it's hard to explain. He would never forget the scene of the plain-dressed woman's first day at the Spirit Void Star Palace. Domineering. The feeling the plain-dressed woman gave him was domineering, incomparably domineering. Moreover, she was unreasonably strong. Hearing Lin Songyun's words, the domineering side of the plain-dressed woman appeared in Yi Xian's mind. It had to be said that her temper was truly explosive. Back then she had wanted to destroy the Azure Firmament world with a single sword strike. At this moment Lin Songyun said softly, Since you don't want to leave now, then I'll accompany you in this world for a while. I've already sent Qingjin back. At most, in a month and a half, the experts of my Spirit Void Star Palace will arrive here. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, Can you beat them? Lin Songyun smiled. Do you know how big the world is? Yi Xian shook his head. Lin Songyun pointed upwards, then said, The vast universe is boundless. In the depths of this vast universe there are star fields, and within these star fields, there are countless worlds. Some of these worlds have life and some don't. And my Spirit Void Star Palace controls the Spirit Void Star Field, which is at least a dozen times larger than your star field. A dozen times larger. Yi Xian's heart trembled and he asked again, Then this Azure Firmament world I'm in is actually very small, right? Lin Songyun smiled. Of course it's very small. Saying this he said softly, Actually the stronger you become, the more you will realize how small you are. Because as you become stronger, you will come into contact with even more things. Before I met her, my Spirit Void Star Palace was already the overlord of that star field. In the Spirit Void Star Field, we could be said to be an invincible existence. Yet with one sword strike she almost destroyed us. Saying this he shook his head. People always have to lower themselves at all times. You may be strong, but there will always be people stronger than you. Hearing this, Yi Xian was a bit moved. He had seen a lot of experts before. The strongest was none other than the plain-clothed woman, and the plain-clothed woman had never attacked him. Thus, when he faced the plain-clothed woman, he did not feel any sense of helplessness. But when facing the white-haired man, he had felt a deep sense of helplessness. Facing this kind of expert, he could not do anything. If it wasn't for the pale sword sect sword formation, all of them would have died. At this time, Lin Songyun seemed to know what Zhou Xian was thinking, and he smiled. Don't underestimate yourself. It's already very rare for you to reach this level at such a young age. You have to know that that person has cultivated for at least thousands of years. If you were given that much time, you wouldn't be weaker than him, right? Zhou Xian thought about it and then grinned. That's true. Actually, I'm still very outstanding. Lin Songyun. A moment later, Lin Songyun left. Inside the hall, only Zhou Xian was left. At this time, Yuqi walked out. She glanced at Zhou Xian. Go to consecutive brush peak. Zhou Xian was struck dumb. Then he asked, why? Yuqi said indifferently, Nangong is senior brother Lian's disciple. Zhou Xian was silent. Yuqi walked in front of him. Nangong betrayed the sect, it was his fault. You killing him is also not wrong. But, do you understand what I mean? Zhou Xian nodded. I understand. Yuqi nodded. Being a person is often more important than cultivating. With that, she turned and returned to the inner hall. After a moment of silence, Zhou Xian left Cloudy Sword Hall and came to Consecutive Brush Peak. Inside Consecutive Brush Peak Hall, Lian Bixin glanced at Zhou Xian. What's the matter? Zhou Xian bowed slightly. I met Nangong Xiangyue before. Nangong doesn't give me the feeling that he's a despicable person. Why would he? Lian Bixin glanced at Zhou Xian. Under jealousy, do you understand? Jealousy. Zhou Xian was silent. Lian Bixin said softly, what's the scariest? Being unable to see others do well is the scariest. All these years he's been suppressed by Shangyu. And after you came he was suppressed by you again. Suppressed by Shangyu, there's still a day when he can stand out. At least he thinks that if he works hard he has a chance to surpass Shangyu. But for you. Saying this, he glanced at Zhou Xian. For you he can't see such hope. You're so outstanding that even the older generation blushes with shame. Zhou Xian lowered his head. I've never thought so much. Lian Bixin shook his head. It's not your fault. I've been negligent all these years. Saying this, he looked at Zhou Xian. If you become the sect leader in the future, you must remember this. It's impossible for a person to not make mistakes in life. Many times, if a disciple makes a mistake as the sect leader, you shouldn't just kill him. You should give him a chance to turn over a new leaf. Zhou Xian nodded. I understand. He knew that the person in front of him still held a grudge. After all, Nangong was nurtured by the other party. He must have feelings for him. Lian Bixin nodded. Go back. Tell junior sister that I'm a person who distinguishes between good and evil. If he's right, he's right. If he's wrong, he's wrong. It's Nangong's fault for sneaking up on you. It's understandable for you to kill him. I won't have any other thoughts. Zhou Xian bowed slightly, then turned around and left. In the hall, Lian Bixin closed his eyes slowly. After a long time he shook his head and sighed. Silly. After leaving Lian Bixin Peak, Zhou Xian walked towards Weapon Forging Peak. Actually, he didn't regret killing Nangong. Because if it wasn't for his special cultivation technique, Nangong's sword would have taken his life. When Nangong chose to be his enemy, their past friendship naturally vanished. Towards his enemies, Zhou Xian would never be merciful. Not long later, Zhou Xian arrived at Weapon Forging Peak. Zhang Tai glanced at Zhou Xian and said directly, I don't have any treasures here. Go look elsewhere. Zhou Xian's face darkened. Am I that kind of person? Am I? Zhou Xian didn't say anything. He took out 100 purple source crystals and placed them in front of Zhang Tai. In the previous battle, Martial Uncle was invincible and exhausted too much of your Xian Qi. These purple source crystals are a small token of my appreciation. I hope Martial Uncle will accept it. Zhang Tai glanced at the purple source crystals before looking at Zhou Xian. What do you mean exhausted too much Xian Qi? Can't you just say that I'm seriously injured? Zhou Xian chuckled and turned to run. In the cave, Zhang Tai looked at the 100 purple source crystals for a long time. In the end, he shook his head with a smile and kept the purple source crystals. After leaving Weapon Forging Peak, Zhou Xian went to the other peaks. He was left with less than 200 purple source crystals. Of course he didn't feel any heartache. An hour later Yi Xian returned to Cloudsword Peak. There was one more person in Cloudsword Hall. It was Martial Uncle Gu from Array Dao Peak. Since Array Dao Peak was destroyed, she was here to stay temporarily. The first thing Martial Uncle Gu said to Yi Xian was, "Go cook." Yi Xian, nightfall. Yi Xian sat at the entrance of Cloudsword Hall and took out a voice transmission talisman. After a while Yi Xian kept the talisman and said softly, "There are some things that I should do." /11 under. Chapter 328. Peace. Following the retreat of the Realm Defense Alliance, Azure World experienced a rare moment of peace. Of course, everyone knew that this was the calm before the storm. Cloudsword Peak. Cultivate. Yi Xian entered a frenzied cultivation mode. He was already at the true Imperial Spell Realm. In terms of Cultivation Realm, there was no way he could improve in a short period of time. In terms of Sword Dao, he could only rely on opportunities and enlightenment. What he could cultivate now was sword skills. He did not know many sword skills now. He only knew one sword to determine life and death, one sword to determine soul, 10 feet kill and instant space. These few sword skills were extremely threatening to true Imperial Spell Realm experts. However, now that he had reached the true Imperial Spell Realm, it meant that he could improve these sword skills again. Especially one sword to determine life and death. This sword skill was not just a sword skill to him, it was also a direction. The mysterious woman left him a direction for Sword Dao. Every time he thought of this sword skill he would think of one word. Confidence. Whether it was cultivation or fighting, one must have confidence in oneself. Of course one had to control the limit. Otherwise one would be conceited. If a person was conceited he would definitely play himself to death. At the back of the mountain of Cloudsword Peak, Yi Xian sat on the ground with a sword floating in front of him. His sword intent was everywhere. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm. The next moment rays of sword light appeared around him. These sword lights seemed to appear out of thin air and surrounded him. In space. This was the only sword skill that he had cultivated in Pale Sword Sect. However, Yi Xian realized that this sword skill had a lot of room for improvement. Previously he had used this move to kill the true defense Dharma Realm expert in an instant. Only by using this move could he kill a true defensive magic realm expert in an instant without making a sound. He realized that after reaching the true Imperial Spell Realm he was more adept at using the Space Dao Law. Excavating the Space Dao Law and using it to strengthen instant space. That was his goal now. Yi Xian waved his right hand. In an instant the surrounding sword lights dispersed. Not far away stood two women. It was Senior Uncle Gu and Yuqi. Yuqi said softly, "This instant space sword of his is already completely different from before." As she spoke she looked at Uncle Master Gu beside her. "Zhou Xian, can you tell what has changed?" Gu Xiaoxian glanced at Yi Xian in the distance and said softly, "Ghost." This instant space sword was cultivated by him into an assassin's move. Yuqi nodded. "If I'm not wrong, the person who secretly killed the Realm Protection Alliance should be him." Gu Xiaoxian nodded. "It should be him." As she spoke she glanced at Yi Xian who was not far away. "He's talented and has a good character but he's too thick-skinned." Thick skin. Yuqi nodded in agreement. "Very thick. My Azure Sword Sect swordsman is unparalleled." Gu Xiaoxian said softly, "It's not necessarily a bad thing. At the very least you won't be at a disadvantage." As she spoke she glanced at Yuqi. "Cultivation is cultivation but cooking is still cooking. Make sure he doesn't forget later." As she spoke she turned and left. Yuqi nodded. "That makes sense." As she spoke she looked at Yi Xian who was not far away. "Wait for me to cook." As she spoke she turned and left. Yi Xian was speechless. Several days passed. Yi Xian had increased the power of his sword technique by at least one level. Now if he were to encounter those golden-robed experts again, he would not be in such a sorry state. Even if he could not win he would not be in such a sorry state. Especially the instant space sword. If he were to hide now he had an 80% chance of assassinating the opponent. 80% chance. It could be said that he was full of confidence. That was because his current instant space sword could be said to be truly undetectable. And he had gained a lot from the previous battle. because from that battle he'd noticed that he had too many inadequacies. A moment later, the Space Dao Law suddenly condensed between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Now what he had to do was condense the Space Dao Law sword. If he were to encounter the left and right protectors now, he would be utterly unable to resist them. But if he condensed the space sword, then he was definitely confident in his ability to fight them. Even though Lin Songyun had asked Qingzhen to return and get help, Yi Xian had to become stronger regardless of whether he had help or not. It was still the same saying, one must rely on oneself. In the past he hadn't dared to condense the Space Dao Law before he had attained the true defense law realm. But now that he had attained the true defense law realm, he could control space. The space around Yi Xian had started to tremble, and it rippled like the surface of a river being blown by the wind. In next to no time, strands of space energy seeped out incessantly from the surroundings, and it didn't take long for the tip of a sword to appear in front of Yi Xian. The tip of the sword was transparent like water. On the other hand, cold sweat was gradually trickling down Yi Xian's forehead. It was slightly strenuous. Even at the true defense law realm, he noticed that it was still slightly strenuous for him when the space energy appeared. However, he could still persist. Yi Xian pressed his palms together, steadied his mind, and then continued to utilize the Space Dao Law. It didn't take long for more and more space energy to appear. At the same time, the tip of the sword in front of him was gradually condensing into a sword. Yi Xian was delighted when he witnessed this scene. But it was this delight that caused his mind to relax, and in an instant. Rumble. With Yi Xian at the center, the surroundings shook violently. Blood instantly flowed out of Yi Xian's 7 apertures. Moreover, his entire body spun like a top, and this continued for around 15 minutes before he finally stopped. As soon as he stopped, Yi Xian fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Yu Qi suddenly appeared in front of him, and her beautiful brows knit together slightly as she gazed at Yi Xian, who was on the ground. After that, she carried Yi Xian in her arms and brought Yi Xian back to Cloudsword Hall. An hour later, Yi Xian woke up. At this moment, his head was still dizzy and it was extremely uncomfortable. Yi Xian shook his head and laughed bitterly. I was really careless this time. I can't be distracted at all while condensing the Space Dao Law. What are you doing? Meanwhile, Yu Qi appeared by his bedside. Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Condensing a sword. Yu Qi said in a low voice, it's related to space? Yi Xian nodded. Yu Qi said seriously, the Space Dao is extremely profound and even a true defensive Dharma realm expert only knows a little about it. It's extremely dangerous for you to utilize it. Do you understand? Yi Xian nodded. I was careless just now. Yu Qi shook her head. It wasn't carelessness, but you don't understand how terrifying the space energy is. If space shatters and forms a spatial turbulence, then you'll be instantly minced by the spatial turbulence with your current strength. Understand? Spatial turbulence? Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Yu Qi nodded slightly. If space is forcibly torn open, then the torn space will be a spatial turbulence. This kind of turbulence is extremely terrifying, and even a true defensive Dharma realm expert will be smashed to pieces if he's caught in it. Speaking up to this point, she looked at Yi Xian and said seriously, if you don't have absolute confidence, don't force it again. What sword is that, understand? Yi Xian said with a smile, it's okay, I'm confident. I was just careless before. Yu Qi glanced at Yi Xian. If you want to condense it again, let me be by your side, understand? Yi Xian was just about to say no when Yu Qi suddenly said, understand. His voice was somewhat stern. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Heh. Yu Qi nodded slightly and turned to leave. The next day Yi Xian continued. But this time Yu Qi was by his side. Obviously she was still a little worried about Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not hide it from Yu Qi and directly took out the Space Dao Law. When he saw the Space Dao Law between Yi Xian's eyebrows, Yu Qi's expression suddenly turned solemn. Soon, countless spatial forces suddenly appeared around Yi Xian in the distance, and these spatial forces began to converge. The surrounding space was a little unstable. Yu Qi slowly clenched her right hand, ready to attack at any time. In the distance, a sword tip quietly condensed in front of Yi Xian. This time Yi Xian did not dare to be distracted again and focused on activating the spatial forces. Although it was a little strenuous, it was not a big problem as long as he did not get distracted. About an hour later, Yi Xian's face was covered in sweat, and his face was also a little pale. However, the spatial sword in front of him had condensed halfway. Only half of the sword body and hilt were missing. On the other side, Yu Qi's expression was also extremely solemn. She was ready to attack at any time. In the distance, the space around Yi Xian suddenly began to tremble violently. At the same time, the surrounding spatial forces also increased, and the remaining half of the sword body began to condense. Yu Qi got up and walked to within 10 feet of Yi Xian. She stared closely at Yi Xian and clenched her right hand tightly. It was obvious that the critical moment was approaching. In the prison pagoda, a tiny figure suddenly slipped out from the second floor. It was Xiaoling. Xiaoling flew outside and then began to climb to the top of the pagoda. She liked to stay at the top of the pagoda, and soon she reached the top. The great god on the second floor was asleep. Then she could freely stroll around. She floated in front of the three swords and blinked. No one knew what she was thinking. Soon she suddenly hugged the sword in the middle and was about to pull it out, but at this moment she suddenly remembered Yi Xian's words. She let go of her hand and said softly, "He said I can't pull it out." After saying that, she turned and was about to go down the pagoda, but soon she stopped. She looked at the sword in the middle and bit her little finger, a little puzzled. "But he didn't say which one I can't pull out." "Can't pull out means I can't pull out one, but I can pull out two." After saying that, she giggled and floated in front of the three swords. She looked at the three swords, pausing on the rightmost sword for a while, but in the end she still looked at the sword in the middle. Her two little hands hugged the sword, a little excitement in her eyes. "Soon I can fly on the sword." After saying that, she suddenly exerted force. The sword trembled slightly. In the outside world, Yi Xian felt as if he had been struck by lightning and his mind went blank. What happened? This was the last thought in Yi Xian's mind. P.S. Today the doctor said that I can be discharged after changing my medicine 2 more times. However, this diabetes and uremia, I have to slowly nurse it back to health. After being in the hospital for a month and a half, the biggest feeling I have is that health is the most important. Everyone who is working hard outside, please remember health is the most important. May everyone in the world be healthy. Flash 11 on the Chapter 329. The space around Yi Xian trembled violently as if it was about to shatter. Yu Qi's expression changed drastically. She rushed in front of Yi Xian, but at this moment the surrounding spatial power blasted towards her. Bang! Yu Qi was instantly blasted back hundreds of feet. The next moment, a sword suddenly appeared in Yu Qi's hand. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a sword light and shot forward. Just like that, the sword light tore through the air and Yu Qi forced her way to Yi Xian's side. Then she wrapped her right hand around Yi Xian's waist and disappeared. The place where Yi Xian was originally standing had been twisted into a strange vortex. Inside the world prison pagoda, Xiao Linger at the top of the pagoda seemed to notice that something was wrong. She stopped, and at this moment the second floor god suddenly appeared in front of her. She coldly looked at Xiao Linger without saying a word. Xiao Linger blinked, then covered her eyes, turned around and slowly crawled down. As she crawled, she said, "Can't see me, can't see me." At this moment the second floor god suddenly grabbed her and disappeared from the top of the pagoda. Inside the Cloudsword Hall, Yi Xian was lying on the bed, unconscious. Beside him were Yu Qi and Zhou Xian. Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian, frowning slightly. Her right arm was covered in cracks which were caused by the spatial power just now. That spatial power was so strong that she still felt some lingering fear when she thought of it. At this moment Zhou Xian suddenly said, "That power is difficult to control. Don't let him try for the time being." Yu Qi shook her head. "He almost succeeded. Something must have gone wrong." Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "It's very dangerous." Yu Qi softly said, "He won't give up." Zhou Xian nodded slightly. "That's true, that guy is very stubborn." At this moment Zhou Xian appeared in the hall. He glanced at the two girls and said, "Lian Bai Peak Sect Master has something to say." The two girls nodded. Soon the three of them left. An hour later Yi Xian woke up. The first thing Yi Xian did after waking up was enter the world prison pagoda. This was because he now knew that it was Xiao Linger who had done this. On the first floor, Xiao Linger was hiding in a corner facing the wall and squatting down. Her two small hands were hugging her calves and she was sobbing from time to time. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. He hadn't hit her yet. At this time the second floor god appeared in front of him, but it was not his real body. The Almighty on the second floor glanced at Yi Xian. She can pull out the sword. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice. Why? Why is she able to pull out the sword? In his opinion, this kind of sword of unknown rank was definitely not something that anyone could easily pull out. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too embarrassing? The second floor god shook her head. There are two possibilities. First, that sword can be pulled out by anyone. Second, she is special. Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Yi Xian. Don't even think about those three swords. If she hadn't suddenly stopped just now, once the sword was pulled out, at least half of the seal in this pagoda would have broken instantly. At that time you would be the first to die. Yi Xian was silent, because he knew that the second floor god was not trying to scare him. Once the seal in this pagoda was broken, who could stop those existences in the pagoda? Thinking of this, Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger in the corner not far away and shook his head. This little girl was really too naughty. He walked behind Xiao Linger. Xiao Linger turned to look at him with tears in her eyes. He looked very wronged. Yi Xian was speechless. Why are you wronged? I was almost killed because of you just now. Xiao Linger bowed her head slightly. I didn't pull it out. Yi Xian looked a little stern. Didn't I tell you that the sword can't be pulled out? Beside him, the second floor god said lightly. She said you didn't let her pull out the sword, but she didn't say which one. So she thinks that she can't pull out one sword, but she can pull out two. Xiao Linger nodded quickly. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Could it be understood like this? A moment later, Yi Xian could not help but smile bitterly. Because he had discovered that this little girl's way of understanding and logic were different from that of ordinary people. She regarded herself as a human, but in fact she was not a human. Her logic was half learned from humans and he didn't know where it came from. In short, she would think and act from the side that was beneficial to her. Xiao Linger glanced at Yi Xian and felt a little guilty. Will you hit me? Yi Xian shook his head and said seriously, why did you go to pull out the sword? Did the guy on the fourth floor ask you to go? Xiao Linger hesitated, then said, he said that with a sword he can fly on a sword like you. It really was the fourth floor. Yi Xian looked up. This guy on the fourth floor was up to no good. He had to be careful. Recollecting his thoughts, Yi Xian took out a sword and handed it to Xiao Linger. If you have any questions or needs in the future, you can come to me directly. Understand? Xiao Linger grabbed the sword, her face full of a bright smile. Okay. Looking at Xiao Linger's bright smile, Yi Xian smiled slightly. In fact, he was not really angry because this little girl in front of him did not mean any harm. She was just a little playful. However, he needed to discipline her in the future. Otherwise, she might cause trouble in the future. After playing with Xiao Linger for a while, Yi Xian left the World Prison Pagoda and went to the back mountain again. Continue condensing. 2 hours later, a sword appeared in front of Yi Xian. The sword seemed to be condensed from water and it was transparent. The space around the sword was trembling. The spatial sword. Actually, he had already condensed it successfully, but Xiao Linger had ruined it. But that was not a problem. He was already familiar with how to condense it, so he had succeeded this time. Yi Xian's expression was solemn as he looked at the spatial sword. The sword contained extremely powerful spatial energy, and the power within it made even him feel slightly fearful. Yi Xian did not test the power of the sword because it would definitely cause a huge commotion if he did. Yi Xian put away the sword, and at this time he suddenly took out a sound transmission stone, and a familiar voice came from the stone. Yi Xian grinned, turned around and flew on his sword. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the foot of Pale Sword Sect's mountain. At the foot of Pale Sword Sect's mountain he saw 3 familiar faces. It was Mo Yunqi, Bai Zai and Jianji. Yi Xian walked in front of the 3 and gave them a big hug. These 3 people were called by him. At noon Yi Xian left Pale Sword Sect with the 3 of them. In the air the 4 of them flew on the wind. Mo Yunqi and Bai Zai had reached the myriad low realm, so the 2 of them could already fly on the wind. Yi Xian did not fly on his sword but flew with them. In the air, Mo Yunqi looked at Yi Xian. Bandit Yi, the brothers of the academy are waiting for you to summon them. Bai Zai nodded. Our Blue Waves Academy's Dao soldiers as well as the subordinates of the 9th princess. Now their battle strength is definitely the first in Qingzhou. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, Don't be anxious. Now the matter of Realm Protection Alliance had not been settled. If he summoned the students of Blue Waves Academy, Realm Protection Alliance would definitely not let Blue Waves Academy off. Mo Yunqi also nodded. Now is indeed not the time, but I want to tell you that the brothers are waiting for you. Yi Xian smiled. I know. Blue Waves Academy he naturally did not forget because this was what he promised Old Man Ji. Soon the four of them arrived at the foot of a mountain, and on this mountain there was an academy. Blue Waves Academy. This was the academy where Old Man Zeng stayed. Yi Xian looked up at the top of the mountain and said indifferently, let's go. The four of them walked up the mountain, and at this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of the four of them. The middle-aged man coldly looked at Yi Xian and the others. Now is not the time to recruit students, come back next year. Yi Xian said indifferently, I am not here to study, I am here to see someone. Hearing this, the middle-aged man frowned. See who? Yi Xian turned to Xianxia. What is the dean's master called? Xianxia shook his head. He has never said. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then turned to the middle-aged man. Can I trouble you to inform that student Jiyun is here? Jiyun? The middle-aged man frowned. Is he that traitor? Traitor. Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. At this moment the middle-aged man sneered. Don't waste your time. He is just a traitor of my Blue Waves Academy. You want to rely on his name to enter my Blue Waves Academy. It is simply a pipe dream. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and in the next moment the middle-aged man's voice stopped abruptly. Because in between his eyebrows there was a sword. You? The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian in shock. You? Yi Xian sheathed his sword. Go and report, say that Yi Xian is here to see someone. Yi Xian. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the middle-aged man's expression instantly changed. Now in Blue Firmament's world, who did not know Yi Xian? The current Yi Xian could be said to be the sun in the sky. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with fear. Wait a moment. With that he turned around and left. Approximately 15 minutes later, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. This person was Blue Firmament's Academy's Dean, Qiu Yuan. Qiu Yuan glanced at Yi Xian, his expression somewhat complicated. He naturally knew about Yi Xian and Ji Yun, and also knew that Yi Xian was Qingzhou Blue Firmament's Academy's Dean. And this person in front of him did not recognize Blue Firmament's Academy. Yi Xian cupped his fists. The four of us would like to see Dean Ji's master. I hope your excellency can grant our request. Ji-Yun's master. Qiu Yuan nodded slightly. Sure. With that he glanced at the four of them. He is in seclusion but should be out soon. Follow me. With Qiu Yuan leading the way, the four of them arrived in front of a stone cave. Qiu Yuan was about to leave when at this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, I heard that Dean Ji was chased out, is that right? Qiu Yuan stopped in his tracks, looked at Yi Xian. Yes. Yi Xian said softly, I do not care about Blue Firmament's Academy, but he does. So, I hope that Blue Firmament's Academy will restore his identity. Qiu Yuan narrowed his eyes. This is my Blue Firmament's Academy's internal affairs. Yi Xian said indifferently, I am untalented, I would like to seek advice from the younger generation of Blue Firmament's Academy. /11 under. Chapter 330. Causing trouble. He's here to cause trouble. Qiu Yuan stared fixedly at Yi Xian. My Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect don't have any grudges. Yi Xian was expressionless. If there's no one in the younger generation of Blue Waves Academy, then I'd like to seek guidance from you. Qiu Yuan's expression instantly turned cold. Challenge him. Qiu Yuan looked at Yi Xian with an unsightly expression. If he fought with Yi Xian it would be fine if he won, but if he lost, then the reputation of Blue Waves Academy would be ruined. And if he won there would be no benefit and Yi Xian wouldn't lose face. But if Yi Xian won, in the end he didn't have the confidence to defeat Yi Xian. Because Yi Xian had already killed a true Imperial Law Realm expert in Blue Sword Sect, and he had done it very easily. Not to mention the younger generation, Yi Xian's strength was extremely strong even among the older generation. How dare you? At this moment an angry shout came from the side. Yi Xian, what qualifications do you have to challenge the dean? Yi Xian's group of four turned around and saw a young man in his 20s standing not far away. He wore a white robe. Qiu Yuan frowned when he saw this person. Stand down. The young man bowed slightly to Qiu Yuan, then he looked at Yi Xian and said angrily, Dean, this person is arrogant. Today I am willing to represent Blue Waves Academy and fight him. I will be responsible for my own life. Qiu Yuan looked coldly at the young man. I said stand down, didn't you hear me? The young man's expression was slightly unsightly. Dean, I'm not afraid of him, At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, then bring it on. The young man charged directly at Yi Xian. Qiu Yuan's expression changed drastically when he saw this, and he was about to stop him. But in the distance, an arm flew out with a trail of blood. It was the young man's arm. The young man's forehead was pointed by a sword. Yi Xian. Qiu Yuan glared at Yi Xian. Don't go too far. Yi Xian said indifferently, going too far? Do you think I'm going too far? As he spoke he shook his head slightly. If that's the case then I'll go too far. As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of formidable sword intent suddenly swept out from within him, and Qiu Yuan's expression turned grim when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian, what are you doing? He was obviously afraid of Yi Xian. Not only was Yi Xian's personal strength formidable, there was also another reason, and that was the Pale Sword sect behind Yi Xian. And now, Blue Sword sect had just won against Realm Protection Alliance. Now, Blue Waves Academy couldn't afford to offend Blue Sword sect. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the side. Stop. As soon as the voice sounded, the mountain gate nearby opened and a gray-robed old man walked out. Yi Xian stopped and faced the gray-robed old man with Ji Anji's group of 4. The old man walked over to Yi Xian's group, glanced at Yi Xian's group and asked softly, You are little Yun students? Yi Xian nodded. You should be Principal Ji's teacher, right? The gray-robed old man nodded slightly. Yi Xian took 2 steps back and then said, Kneel. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 of them knelt in unison in front of the gray-robed old man. Seeing this scene, Qiu Yuan and the others who were nearby were instantly stunned. Because the sword attack of Yi Xian had alarmed many people of Blue Waves Academy, many students and teachers of Blue Waves Academy had gathered in the surroundings at this moment. In front of Yi Xian's group of 4, the gray-robed old man was also slightly stunned. In the next moment he hurriedly helped Yi Xian's group of 4 up, and his expression was somewhat complicated. There is no need for this. Yi Xian said softly, Principal Ji said that he has let you down and that he was disappointing back then. He hopes that you will not be angry. The gray-robed old man shook his head slightly. It is all in the past. Yi Xian nodded. There is another reason why I am here, and that is I hope. The gray-robed old man smiled. Hope that Blue Waves Academy will restore his identity? Yi Xian nodded. The gray-robed old man shook his head. There is no need. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Why? The gray-robed old man smiled. I know his character. In fact, he already has no feelings for the academy, and he will not be happy to restore his identity. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, I understand. The gray-robed old man glanced at Yi Xian's group of 4. No matter what enmity we have in the past, I hope that all of it will be forgotten, all right? Yi Xian fell silent for a moment and then he smiled, all right. The gray-robed old man smiled when he heard this. Very good. Yi Xian cupped his fists. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left with Mo Yunqi's group of 3. Meanwhile, the gray-robed old man suddenly said, I heard that you established Blue Waves Academy in Azure Prefecture. Yi Xian stopped and nodded, yes. The gray-robed old man hesitated to speak. Yi Xian smiled. Are you trying to say that it shares the same name as Blue Waves Academy in the Central Divine Prefecture? The gray-robed old man nodded. Yi Xian turned to face the gray-robed old man and the others, and then he smiled. If I, Yi Xian, don't die, I will make Azure Prefecture's Blue Waves Academy the largest academy in the firmament world. I want everyone to know that the founding ancestor of Blue Waves Academy is Ji Yun. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and led Mo Yunqi's group of 4 away. Meanwhile, the expressions of Qiu Yuan and the others who stood behind Yi Xian's group were unsightly to the extreme. Because if Yi Xian didn't perish, then who would know about their Blue Waves Academy in the future? After all, Yi Xian's reputation was like the scorching sun in the midday sky, and he even had the support of the Blue Sword sect. Under such circumstances, If Yi Xian really intended to move Blue Waves Academy to the Central Divine Prefecture, then it could be said to be a lethal blow to Blue Waves Academy. Qiu Yuan's expression was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Meanwhile, the white-robed old man by his side spoke abruptly, "Don't let your thoughts run wild. The Realm Defense Alliance might dare to touch him, but our Blue Waves Academy absolutely can't have any designs on him. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as simple as losing an arm today." Qiu Yuan gazed at the gray-robed old man, and the latter spoke indifferently, "At that time little Yun came to our Blue Waves Academy for help, but we refused him and then he perished. Do you think these 4 little fellows aren't angry? Especially that Yi Xian. He said that he came to look for me today, but actually isn't he here to fight for little Yun's honor?" Qiu Yuan fell silent. The gray-robed old man shook his head and sighed. "No matter what, our Blue Waves Academy can't have any disputes with him." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and his eyes became slightly complicated. Actually, all 4 of them could be considered as students of Blue Waves Academy. If Blue Waves Academy had casually sent a few people to Azure Prefecture, then with Ji Yun's character he would have definitely allowed these 4 little fellows to follow him back. And among these 4 people besides Yi Xian, the other 3 were also geniuses among geniuses. Unfortunately, Blue Waves Academy had looked down on Azure Prefecture's Blue Waves Academy. Now, Blue Waves Academy's headquarters couldn't afford to associate with them. Thinking of this, the gray-robed old man sighed again and turned to leave. Yi Xian, Mo Yunqi and the rest returned to Blue Sword Sect. But this time Yi Xian didn't let the 3 of them return. Instead he let them go to Sky Cloud City. This was the biggest city in the Divine Central Continent. Development. In future, Blue Waves Academy would definitely develop vigorously. And if Blue Waves Academy came to the Divine Central Continent in future, they couldn't possibly not have a territory. Sky Cloud City, this was the place he had his eyes on. This city was now the territory of the Realm Protection Alliance, but it didn't matter, it wouldn't be in future. This was what Yi Xian said to Mo Yunqi and the other 2. And this time Yi Xian didn't let the 3 of them leave empty-handed. Instead he let the 3 of them bring along 5 billion high-grade spirit stones. 5 billion high-grade spirit stones, they could do a lot of things. As for Yi Xian himself, he went to Gu Wu clan. Now that there was no movement from the Realm Protection Alliance, he had to complete many things. Dao Law. He had promised the great god on the 2nd floor that he would let her out. After Yi Xian arrived at Gu Wu clan, the previous clan leader of Gu Wu clan was obviously a little unhappy. After bidding farewell to him, he left. Yi Xian didn't care. He found Wei Yongtian. Seeing Yi Xian, Wei Yongtian was incomparably happy, dragging him to various places of Gu Wu clan. On a tree branch, Yi Xian and Wei Yongtian sat side by side. Not far in front of them was a crescent-shaped lake like a bright moon. Yi Xian gently rubbed Wei Yongtian's little head. "How do you feel here?" Wei Yongtian hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "They treat me very well, but I want to be with Big Brother." Yi Xian chuckled. "Not for now. When I'm done with my business, I'll bring you out to play. How about that?" Now that the Realm Protection Alliance was determined to get rid of him, it wouldn't be long before that mysterious lord appeared in front of him. At that time, thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head slightly. His situation wasn't particularly good. Wei Yongtian glanced at Yi Xian, then said softly, "I can help you." Yi Xian looked at Wei Yongtian, smiled. "How?" Wei Yongtian raised her little fist, said seriously, "I think I'm very powerful." Yi Xian asked with a smile, "How powerful?" Wei Yongtian thought for a moment, then said, "Very, very powerful." Yi Xian laughed. At this time, the voice of the 2nd floor great god suddenly sounded in his mind. "Laugh? What are you laughing at? If you have the ability, fight her now." "Fight?" Yi Xian frowned, asked in his heart, "Why?" The 2nd floor great god said calmly, "Won't you know if you try?" Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then landed on the ground with Wei Yongtian. He said with a smile, "Come fight me. You have to use your full strength." Wei Yongtian blinked. "Why?" Yi Xian smiled. "Let's spar, understand?" Wei Yongtian thought for a moment, then said, Then I'll fight." Yi Xian smiled. "Come on." Wei Yongtian looked at Yi Xian, then took a step forward, then punched at Yi Xian. This punch, there was no movement, it was a very calm punch. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile. He casually blocked in front of him, But when Wei Yongtian's punch came into contact with his palm, his face instantly changed. Bang! Without any warning, Yi Xian flew thousands of feet away in an instant. On the ground, Yi Xian's body trembled, then directly fainted. At this time, an exclamation suddenly sounded from the prison pagoda. Reincarnation power. Pity I only used 40% of my strength. If I used a few more, this guy would be dead. Pity. It was not the second-floor great god's voice. P.S. When I talked to someone today, he said that all my readers are lazy otakus. But I feel that some of my readers are quite coquettish. They don't seem like otakus at all. Some of them are quite shameless. And some of them will bring me to the great treasure sword. /11 under. Chapter 331. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian woke up. At this moment he was lying on a wooden bed. Beside the bed was Wei Yongtian. She was sprawled at the head of the bed, apparently asleep. Yi Xian rubbed his head with both hands. Soon he recalled what had happened. A punch. He was almost killed by Wei Yongtian's soft punch. Why was that? Yi Xian was completely puzzled. He couldn't figure it out, so he asked the second-floor guru. A moment later, the second-floor guru said calmly, "Her power is a special kind of power. In short, it's very strong. Do you understand?" Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What special power?" The second-floor guru said coldly, "Think about it yourself." Yi Xian was speechless. What was this second-floor guru up to this time? At this moment, Wei Yongtian raised her head. When she saw that Yi Xian was awake, she grabbed Yi Xian's hand and said nervously, "Brother." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. He had to admit that it was a little embarrassing, because he was almost killed by a punch. Shaking his head, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm fine now." Saying that, he paused for a moment and then asked, "That punch of yours, why was it so strong?" Wei Yongtian looked at her little fist and shook her head. "I don't know. I only know that not long ago I felt like a dormant power in my body awakened." Saying that, she looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "I don't dare to tell others, only you." Dormant power. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Do you feel any other discomfort?" Wei Yongtian shook her head. "No, it's just that the power is getting stronger and stronger." Yi Xian gently rubbed Wei Yongtian's little head, a little worried. This little girl was too extraordinary. At this moment, the second-floor guru's voice sounded again. "Don't worry about her. Hurry up and find the Tao Law." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I felt the Tao Law here before, but now, search." The second-floor guru said, "The Tao Law must be here in the ancient Wu clan." Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. "Then let's look around." After resting for a while, Yi Xian played with Wei Yongtian for a while and then began to wander around the ancient Wu clan. Now he could wander around as he pleased because the Wu clan leader was Wei Yongtian. He could even go to the clan's forbidden area. Not only the ancient Wu clan, but there was also of Yongtian of Yi Xian of the ancient Wu clan. But he had of time Yi Xian of. At noon, Yi Xian came to a swamp. This was one of the more dangerous places of the ancient Witch clan. The swamp there had existed for a long time. Besides the swamp, it also had poisonous gas. Wu clan members of Time, the clan members of Tian of the clan members were forbidden. Yi Xian frowned as soon as he arrived, because the poisonous gas was so strong that even he was a little surprised. Ordinary cultivators could not withstand this kind of poisonous gas at all. However, to him, the chi of primal chaos had no effect on him at all. Any chi or evil that entered his body would be purified by the chi of primal chaos. Just like now, the chi of primal chaos disappeared without a trace before it could get close to his body. Yi Xian flew toward the depths of the swamp on his sword. In any case, he wouldn't let go of any place in the ancient Wu clan. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the depths of the swamp. In the depths of the swamp, he saw some corpses. Most of these corpses belonged to monsters, but some belonged to humans. Obviously, someone had been here. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly bent down and looked down. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Look, there was something swimming in the swamp below him. He ignored it. Just as Yi Xian was about to move forward, the swimming thing below him suddenly dashed out of the swamp. Then a giant bloody mouth bit at him. It was a demonic beast shaped like a crocodile. It was completely pitch black and its eyes were scarlet red. Yi Xian frowned, and then he waved his hand casually, causing a wave of sword light to slash down. Bang! The demonic beast was directly smashed into the swamp by Yi Xian's sword strike. Yi Xian frowned slightly when he saw this scene. Because his sword strike from before was actually unable to destroy the demonic beast's body. What a formidable defensive ability. Yi Xian was slightly shocked in his heart. Right at this moment the entire swamp below him suddenly moved. When he looked carefully, Yi Xian noticed that something was swimming in the entire swamp. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he saw this scene. What the hell is this? Soon, the heads of the demonic beasts emerged from the surface of the swamp, and all of them were looking at Yi Xian. Seeing the dense group of demonic beasts, Yi Xian's expression changed. He did not expect there to be so many demonic beasts. Yi Xian was about to leave when the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly rang in his mind. There's an aura. There's an aura? Yi Xian was stunned and then he hurriedly asked, the aura of Dao Lao? The god on the second floor said, go into the swamp. Upon hearing this, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. Go into the swamp? Why aren't you going in? What kind of joke was this? Go into the swamp. Although he was very good at fighting, if this went on he would definitely be finished. At this moment the god on the second floor fell silent. After a while, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was the god on the second floor. She glanced at Yi Xian and then looked at the demonic beasts below. The next moment her expression turned ferocious and she suddenly roared at the bottom. A powerful demonic beast aura swept down, and in an instant the group of demonic beasts below retreated into the swamp. Soon the entire swamp was restored to peace. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment he remembered that the god on the second floor was also a demonic beast. The god on the second floor looked around and then floated into the distance. Yi Xian hurriedly followed. After a while the god on the second floor stopped. Then she gently slashed her claws at the swamp below, and the swamp below suddenly split open. Then a stone staircase appeared in front of Yi Xian. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. There was another world under this swamp? At this moment the god on the second floor looked at him. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Understood. As soon as he finished speaking, he descended and walked down the stone staircase. On the other hand, the god on the second floor had returned to the prison pagoda. Obviously she couldn't come out for too long. Yi Xian walked down the stone staircase. It was pitch black inside. Needless to say, he was a little flustered because every Dao law wasn't simple. The first Dao law had been obtained with the help of the mysterious woman, and he'd obtained it very easily. As for obtaining the spatial Dao law, he'd been completely lucky. As for the second Dao law, he didn't know if he would be so lucky again. No matter what, he had to be careful. Yi Xian continued walking down, and after almost an hour he finally reached the bottom. Not far in front of him was a palace, and in front of the palace was a ground full of corpses. At least 100. The corners of Yi Xian's eyes twitched when he saw this. As expected, things weren't so simple. Yi Xian walked over to the corpses. Based on their appearance, these corpses should have been dead for a very, very long time. Besides that, these corpses... If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. There were no wounds on their faces, not even a single wound. They died very peacefully as if they'd fallen asleep. How strange. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Great God on the second floor, this place isn't very safe. The great God on the second floor said indifferently, Are you afraid? Yi Xian smiled. It was not that he was afraid. But at that moment he understood one thing. One couldn't underestimate anything or anyone because that person might give you a pleasant surprise. Yi Xian continued forward. Even though it was dangerous here, he still had to continue forward. After all, he'd promised the great God on the second floor that he would let her out. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the palace, and he didn't hesitate to directly push it open. The interior of the palace was empty. Yi Xian walked in. The interior of the palace was extremely quiet, and his footsteps seemed especially resounding. Only his footsteps could be heard in the entire palace. At this moment an old man suddenly appeared not far from Yi Xian. The old man's back was hunched and his body was almost bent. His face was covered with poisonous pus and he looked extremely hideous. At this moment he just stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Just as he was about to speak, the old man suddenly said, Are you here for that thing? That thing? Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat and he said, Yes. The old man suddenly laughed sinisterly. Yi Xian shook his head. Old man, don't scare me. The old man sneered. Scare you? Young man, do you see those corpses outside? Those are all lessons to be learned from the mistakes of your predecessors. Yi Xian smiled. Do you know who I am? The old man looked at Yi Xian. Who are you? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Low profile. I want to keep a low profile. The old man was expressionless. Low profile? Do you think you can still go out now? Yi Xian frowned. What do you mean? With that he turned and walked out of the hall. When he walked to the door, an invisible barrier blocked in front of him. He couldn't go out. Yi Xian turned to face the old man and the latter said calmly, There's no need to look. The old man has been trapped here for 100 years. 100 years. Trapped for 100 years. Yi Xian said solemnly. Who did it? The old man glanced at Yi Xian. What do you think? Yi Xian was about to speak and at this moment the second floor god suddenly said, It's it. That Dao Law, it's in this hall. Yi Xian quickly said, Should I use the pagoda to subdue it? Hold on. The second floor god said solemnly, It's spying on you, which means that this guy might have regained some consciousness. Yi Xian was stunned and then asked, This Dao Law still has consciousness? The second floor god said coldly, Everything in the world has a spirit, let alone this Dao Law. The Great Dao Law and the Space Dao Law are still in a deep sleep. Otherwise, do you think Dao Laws are trash? If they recover just like your Space Dao Law, it can destroy your firmament world with a single thought. Yi Xian was a little embarrassed. Actually, thinking about it, these Dao Laws should not be so simple to be able to suppress these almighties in the prison pagoda. However, if the second Dao Law had recovered, it would be a big problem. As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the second floor god suddenly said, This pagoda was heavily damaged back then, and all the Dao Laws and the various origins in the pagoda were severely damaged. This second Dao Law can't recover completely. At most it has recovered a little. Don't worry too much. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Then what should we do now? At this moment the second floor god suddenly said, Aren't you very good at bluffing? Bluff it into coming in. Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. End of this chapter. Chapter 332. Wink. Yi Xian's first thought was that the second floor alchemist was mocking him. However, the second floor alchemist said, We can try. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Why not use the pagoda to subdue it directly? The second floor alchemist said calmly, If its sentience hasn't awakened, there won't be any problem using the pagoda. However, it has recovered a little. If you force it, you might be the first to die. Why? Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Because you can't beat it. Yi Xian was speechless. Wink. Yi Xian paced back and forth in the hall. Damn it, how could he hoodwink it? Did he think the other party was Shaoling or that he could just coax? Beside him, the old man looked at Yi Xian. What are you doing? Yi Xian shook his head. My head hurts. I'm taking a walk. The old man was speechless. At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly faced the old man. Have you come into contact with it? The old man shook his head. No, but I can feel that it's in the dark. In the dark. Yi Xian frowned. What kind of Dao Law was this second Dao Law? If he wanted to hoodwink it, he had to make the other party show itself first. If he used the prison pagoda, it was very likely that the other party would be on guard. If the other party really attacked him, it would be really troublesome. After a moment of silence, the word, Earth, quietly condensed between Yi Xian's brows. Great Dao Law. They were both Dao Laws. No matter what, they should know each other, right? At that moment, a mysterious force suddenly blasted toward Yi Xian. Before Yi Xian could react, he was directly smashed into the wall in the distance. Bam! The entire wall shook violently. Before Yi Xian could stand up, he suddenly felt sleepy and was about to fall asleep. At that moment, an angry roar suddenly sounded in his head. Wake up! Yi Xian felt as if he was drenched in cold water. He became much more clear-headed. After waking up, cold sweat suddenly appeared on Yi Xian's forehead. Fear. Because in that instant just now, it told him that as long as he fell asleep he probably wouldn't wake up again. Moreover, in that instant he felt as if something was flowing out of his body. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, What kind of power is that? After a moment of silence, the second floor god said, You will know in the future. Yi Xian asked again, Why did it attack me when I used the Grand Dao Law? The god on the second floor said calmly, There are a total of 9 Tao laws in the pagoda. These 9 Tao laws existed in the pagoda at the beginning. Among them, some got along well while some didn't. Clearly, the earth rule doesn't get along well with it. Xian's face was filled with black lines. What nonsense was this? Could there be grudges between these Tao laws? If the 9 Tao laws were to gather in the future, wouldn't the entire prison pagoda be turned upside down? Xian retracted his thoughts and asked again, then does it have any grudges with this space Tao law? The Almighty on the second floor said calmly, I don't know. Why don't you try and find out? Xian's face was filled with black lines. Try? If there was a grudge, wouldn't he be finished? However, he decided to give it a try in the end. Soon the space Tao law appeared between his eyebrows. At this time there was no movement in the surroundings. Seeing this scene, Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Obviously, the Tao law on the second floor and the Tao law on the third floor had no grudges. At this time, a white light suddenly floated in front of Xian. In the white light there was a word, but it was a little blurry, so Xian couldn't see it clearly. Tao law. Seeing this white light, Xian was a little excited. On the other side, the old man's face was filled with astonishment. At this time, the white light circled around Xian's body as if it was sizing something up. Dupe. At this time, the voice of the god on the second floor suddenly sounded in Xian's mind. Hurry up and dupe. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Xian was speechless. At this time, Xianxia suddenly appeared in front of Xian. Seeing Xianxia, Xian's expression changed and he hurriedly asked, Why did you come out? Xianxia glanced at the white light and said excitedly, What is this? Xian was about to speak, but Xianxia hugged the white light. At this time, a powerful aura suddenly erupted from the white light, and this aura directly sent Xianxia flying. Xian's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly caught Xianxia. Xianxia was stunned, and in the next moment she flew into a rage. She looked at the white light and said, You hit me. As she spoke, she flew out. The next moment, under Xian's shocked gaze, she directly turned into a white gas and blasted the white light. Boom. The white light flew out in an instant and directly crashed into the wall in the distance, collapsing it. However, in the next moment the white light rushed toward Xianxia again. Xianxia's small hand suddenly clapped, and in the next moment, a powerful force suddenly gathered in the center of her palm. In an instant she shouted softly and then pressed a seal forward. Go to hell. Boom. The white light was blasted away again, and this time, it directly crashed into the entire hall and collapsed. Inside the hall, Xian and the old man were dumbfounded. Xian was completely stunned. In the distance, the two little fellows were still fighting, but Xianxia had completely crushed the Tao law, and at this moment the Tao law was being chased everywhere by Xianxia. Xian's throat rolled and then he said, Second floor guru, so this Xianxia is actually so good at fighting. That's normal. The second floor guru said indifferently, How can a world source be weak? Also, don't tell her that she's very good at fighting, or you'll be finished in the future. I wouldn't dare, I wouldn't dare. Xian hurriedly shook his head. How could he dare to tell Xianxia that she was very good at fighting? Because the current Xianxia obviously had no concept of her own strength. Simply put, she didn't even know that she was very good at fighting. Once she knew that she was very good at fighting, this little fellow would definitely flip the heavens. At this moment, Xianxia suddenly carried the white light to Xian. She looked at Xian and grinned. Give this to me. Xian nodded. Or I bring it into play. Little Ling blinked her eyes and was very happy. Then I'll bring him along. Xian nodded and said seriously, All right. Just like that, Xianxia carried the Tao law back into the prison pagoda. Outside, Xian was very puzzled. Why can't the second Tao law defeat her? The second floor guru said, The second Tao law's ability is special. It's an invincible existence to some people, but it can't do anything to others. Xianxia is the source of heaven and earth. To be precise, she's a spirit, and the second floor's special ability is completely useless against her. Understand? Upon hearing this, Xian instantly understood. To put it bluntly, Xianxia could defeat the second floor's Tao law, but she might not necessarily be able to defeat the major Tao law and the spatial Tao law. No matter what, the second Tao law was finally in his hands. Xian turned to leave. At this moment the nearby old man suddenly said, "You've obtained it?" Yi Xian turned to face the old man and smiled. "I'm just returning it to its rightful owner." With that he turned to leave. The old man said again, "Young friend, wait." Yi Xian stopped. "Is something the matter?" The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "The old man sacrificed too much to obtain it." At this point his expression was slightly complicated. "May I ask exactly what it is?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's a divine object. To be honest, I'm not very sure what it is." The old man nodded slightly. "I understand," Yi Xian said with a smile. "Goodbye." With that he was about to leave. Meanwhile the old man said, "This is the forbidden area of Chanyu. Behind this is where the Qinyu sect used to be. However, the Qinyu sect has already been destroyed. Please continue to the next page." Although it has been destroyed, the grand protective formation of the Qinyu sect is still operating automatically. If you're able to destroy it, then the wealth of the Qinyu sect will be yours. The Qinyu sect? Yi Xian frowned slightly. "I've never heard of it." The old man smiled. "There are many young sects." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "How strong is the Qinyu sect?" To be honest, with his current wealth he didn't care about ordinary powers at all. If it was just a small sect he wouldn't be willing to waste his time. The old man smiled. The Qinyu sect was a power from a very long time ago. In those days, it was only inferior to the Realm Defense Alliance Pale Sword sect and Profound Gate. At its peak it was comparable to these powers. Yi Xian was instantly tempted. He didn't know how rich the Realm Defense Alliance was, but he knew how rich the Pale Sword sect was. Just the swords in the sword tomb were already very terrifying. Since the Qinyu sect was able to compare itself to the Realm Defense Alliance, then it was definitely not simple. Yi Xian smiled. "Senior, please take me to have a look." The old man glanced at Yi Xian and then he led Yi Xian out of the hall. Outside the hall the old man glanced at the corpses, shook his head and sighed. He didn't say anything and just led Yi Xian towards the back. After walking for a while, a giant mountain gate appeared in front of Yi Xian. This entrance was even larger than the Pale Sword sect's entrance. Behind the mountain gate were many large halls. How imposing! That was Yi Xian's first thought. At this moment he believed the old man. The Qinyu sect really isn't simple. Yi Xian was just about to go over when the old man suddenly shook his head. "There's a grand formation." With that he lightly stomped his right foot and a stone flew over, but it disappeared without a trace before it could even get close to the entrance. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression became somewhat solemn. The old man didn't speak but looked at Yi Xian. Obviously, if Yi Xian couldn't find a way, then there really wasn't any other way. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian walked up to the mountain gate. He was just about to draw his sword when the old man beside him hurriedly said, "Don't use force. If you do, the formation will be activated immediately. At that time we'll all die here." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "If I don't force it, then there's no other way." Stupid. At this time, the voice of the second-floor god suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Space Dao Law, use the Space Dao Law to sneak in." Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, "Can I?" With that he didn't wait for the second-floor god's reply and directly activated the Space Dao Law. In an instant he disappeared into thin air. The old man was stunned. When Yi Xian reappeared he was already inside the entrance. The old man was speechless. At this moment Yi Xian was overjoyed. So it really worked. As if he thought of something he turned to the nearby old man. "Sorry, I can enter because of my special movement technique. Don't worry, after I enter I will find a way to break the formation. Then you can come in." If he gave the Space Dao Law to the old man would be able to enter. However, he wouldn't give it to an outsider. The old man nodded slightly. "Understood, young friend. Please be careful." Yi Xian nodded, turned around and walked in. Before long, Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn because he saw some corpses along the way. These corpses didn't have any injuries and were very peaceful as if they were asleep. Yi Xian stopped and asked in a low voice, "Senior, what special ability does the second Dao Law have?" The second-floor god was silent for a while before he said, "Dream power, it can enter one's dream and kill them silently." Yi Xian was stunned and then he said subconsciously, "If I condense it into a sword, won't it become a sword in a dream?" P.S. I haven't updated much recently, so I don't dare to be naughty. Wait until I explode one day, then I'll be naughty again. End of this chapter. That you're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.